Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to MBR, or as we like to call it around here, Nothing But Rants, the show where I find topics that I'm oddly passionate about and I pontificate upon them. These are not hot takes, but rather takes that I'm hot about. What's up? You really like that?
Let's shut up and grind some tape.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the final episode of the week here on the Film Guy Network. We got MBR coming up first, and as our boy Brooks likes to say, since he's not in the studio, I feel the need to say it. Last show, best show. Kirby, how are you on this Thursday?
You know, you say last show, best show, and I probably should say this when Brooks is here, but I don't agree with that, dude.
What? You've listened to Brooks say that phrase for what? Since August of last year. Every Thursday we come into the studio, last show, best show, and now when he's not here, this is when you want to voice your opinions?
I mean, yeah, that does seem kind of cowardice to me, but I'll say it now. Like in high school, my coach always said that if your last rep is your best rep, it means you didn't give enough on the others beforehand. So I've always kind of lived by that. I get the philosophy of like last show, best show, like, hey, give it your all here. This is going to be your best one, but I don't know. That's just if you got not my saying.
So your belief is if you've got enough juice to make Thursday's show your best show, that means Monday and Tuesday were not your best shows. Like you didn't put enough effort into them.
If this is our best show, it means Monday and Tuesday probably sucked. So.
Oh, well, hopefully the people watching throughout us all week, the people that consistently tune in with us, you guys don't believe that Monday and Tuesday show sucked. And we think we got another great list, a loaded show for you, some would say, here on the NBR Hour. We're going to open up with a hot topic, not the college football video game. That seems to be the hottest topic right now. We'll certainly get into that here in a little bit. But Dabo Sweeney continues to give us some great quotes. And if you're familiar with Dabo Sweeney, I'm sure you can guess what these comments were about. But these ones were not your typical Dabo Sweeney transfer portal quotes. These were a little interesting and very Dabo-esque, I should say. The first one, this is when I say Dabo-esque, this is very much Dabo Sweeney in a nutshell. He said, he talked about how, well, we don't use the transfer portal, but all of our players are transfers because they had to transfer from high school to college. What do you think about that? Do you consider that a transfer?
Just when I think Dabo Sweeney can't say more outlandish shit about the transfer portal, he surprises me yet again. Like, what are you trying to accomplish by saying this when you say, oh, no, we do take transfer students? They transferred from high school. Everyone knows that you have a player coming in from high school. You're not transferring schools. That's not a player who has put their name into the transfer portal. That's someone who graduated from high school and is now going to your college. The idea that using that as your excuse, it just comes across as so... It's like car salesman-y. Like you're trying to put Band-Aids over like a massive cut that's just gushing blood right now because it's the best you can do. Like, oh, no, it's fine. Trust me. We're using the transfer portal. Like, I respect him for coming out and sticking to his guns as he has the last however long the transfer portal has been a thing, saying, like, no, we're not going to go to the transfer portal. We're not going to do this. This is something we strongly believe in. But then come out and be like, oh, no, we do use the transfer portal. It's just in this way. Like, just stick with one thing and go full steam ahead on that. If he just every time was like, I'm not talking about the transfer portal, we don't use it, that's not part of our culture, it'd be fine. You wouldn't keep being asked about it. But then to like beat around the bush and say, oh, we do use it. What are you talking about? Everyone's a transfer. It's just the problem I have with Dabo.
Well, I'll tell you what. He is certainly great at finding the silver lining in things. His wife either loves that about him or she absolutely hates it about him, because someone that can always find a positive and a negative, sometimes it's the right thing to say. Sometimes you can say it at the wrong moment. So again, she either loves him or hates him for that. But this is the big talking point that everybody's kind of barging about, and you kind of got into a little bit. But he said most of the guys in the portal aren't good enough to play for us. And he kind of got into this thing about how this is why we don't use the portal, or like he actually mentioned that he tried to go and get a few players out of the portal. I think they tried to go get a center to come play for them out of the portal, but most of the guys in the portal are not good enough to play at Clemson. And, you know, I was kind of thinking about this, like, oh, Dabo's back on his pedestal again. I don't want to use the portal. It's too, I'm too good for the portal. But then in essence, he is right to say that most of the people in the portal aren't good enough to play for us, because of the 1,500 players that enter the portal in the winter and the spring portal combined, he's right. Most of those players probably aren't good enough to play at Clemson, but he is wrong in saying that there's not good enough players to come play at Clemson. If that was his meaning, which I don't think it was, but that's kind of the take that everybody's taking from it, is that there's nobody in the portal that's good enough to come play for us. That's certainly the wrong take.
I mean, what else does he mean by that? Like, why else would he say something like that other than to justify this is why we don't go into the portal? Because out of the 1,500 players that we have in the portal right now, we don't think there's enough good ones, or most of them aren't good enough to play at our school. And yeah, technically he's right. Like, there's, like, you have an absolute valid point by saying most of them aren't good enough to be in the portal. But again, like, why are you using this to justify why you don't use the portal? Because there's been multiple times throughout the seasons, off seasons, where Clemson's been like, hey, Clemson looks a little thin here. Clemson might need an extra person or an extra body here, and they never go out and get it. Where you can't say then, oh, they weren't good enough to play for us. That's just an excuse at this point. Like, if Dabo Swinney is not going to utilize a transfer portal, which he's made that exponentially clear through his actions, why not just come out and say that? Why do you have to come out and say, oh, we're using the transfer portal in this way, ha ha ha, everyone uses it, or their players weren't good enough, that's why we aren't using it? Just say it's not part of our culture, we're not doing it, and leave it alone. Like, and that's kind of what he did at the start of all this thing, but for whatever reason, he's just doubles down on these idiotic takes of, again, like, high school players are not transfer portal players.
Well, here's my whole thing. You know, Clemson was the only program of all the Power 4 teams to not take a single transfer portal player this offseason. And for you to say that most of the guys in the portal aren't good enough to play for us, well, Georgia took a multitude of players in the transfer portal. So they got players that are good enough to come play for them. Alabama, Ohio State used the portal at Litany. I mean, they had a long list of players come play for them from the transfer portal. Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Quinshad Judkins. I mean, the list goes on for them. They're competing for a national title this year. Every single other program found players that were good enough to play for them, yet you didn't. So that leads me to believe that maybe you aren't finding players aren't good enough, or maybe you're just actually being out-recruited in the transfer portal. Maybe every single other program is doing it better than you are in the transfer portal. Because if you say that, well, we tried to get a few other players to come play for us, but they ultimately didn't, that might just mean that you hit them up on their phone and you checked in with them when they enter their names in the transfer portal. But at the end of the day, if you are trying to get players to come play for Clemson out of the transfer portal, then that just means everybody else is out recruiting you. Everybody else is doing it better than you are, because every other Power 4 team and a bunch of other college football programs are finding players that are good enough to come play for them. They are finding good players that are playing meaningful snaps for them this next year, and they're finding players that are helping them compete for national titles every single year. But somehow, some way, Dabo Swinney believes that his program doesn't need to do that. His program's too good for that. And it's ultimately been a big part of this downhill trend for Clemson. And it's offseason by offseason that this continues to happen, and things just aren't getting better. They kind of just have hit this plateau on the graph.
This is why so many people have problems with Dabo Swinney, and he rubs the people the wrong way so many times, because he comes to everything with this holier-than-thou approach. Clemson is too good for the transfer portal. These players aren't good enough to be in our program. It's kind of why, and to an aspect of like his whole, I don't want to bash religion thing, but the way he goes about talking about his religious beliefs, it comes off as a very holier than thou type thing. And I've said before, I respect Dabo Swinney for kind of being a pillar of, like, a last remaining pillar of what college football looked like 10 years ago, where the transfer portal wasn't really a thing and NIL wasn't a main focus. I'm sure Clemson dabbles in NIL some, but he's not one of these schools where it's spending. I respect that aspect of it. I said that a couple months ago, but the fact that they just keep going on, he keeps coming out with this kind of like holier than thou thing. Like I said, if Dabo Swinney just came out and said, this is Clemson, we are who we are, we don't do this, we don't believe in this, leave it at that. But to come out and again just beat around the bush on so many aspects of things, it makes no sense to me. I don't understand why he does it.
And you know, Chad's bringing up a good point about how he won 2 national titles because he got great QB play. Well, there's multiple recent stories of transfer quarterbacks helping teams win national titles. Like Joe Burrow is the epitome of this. He obviously, he was a little bit before it became trendy to enter the portal and before it became a major talking point, but he was at Ohio State and then he transferred to LSU, has an incredible season. They go on and win the national title. And we've seen this with multiple. I mean, Michael Penix, he's another recent one. Quinn Ewers with Texas last year. He helped them compete in the college football playoffs. So Dabo has to understand that Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, obviously those two guys played a major role in him winning a national title. And Cade Klubnik, while he's not one of these great college quarterbacks, he's certainly not horrible. So I understand that you want to have some type of loyalty to him. He's stuck around for you, obviously, because you've been playing him, but why are you not taking shots there? Like, if other programs are finding success getting a quarterback, like even if that is just the one player you take from the transfer portal, we see great quarterbacks every single year enter the transfer portal, go to another school and have these great seasons. So why are you not trying that? Like, why are you not trying to find your next great quarterback there? Because you haven't exactly recruited them. Your last two haven't worked out between DJU and Cade Klubnik. And now you're just kind of going off of the fly, and you're continuing to roll with the guys that have been in your program for multiple years, and you're just not getting better. There's no more, like, positives are not building up on this program. So why would you not try and go take a shot at one of these transfer quarterbacks and see if you can strike some luck there?
Here's a theory I have for this, because I think we can both agree Dabo seems like a pretty prideful person. Like,
sure.
He seems like very proud of himself, the way he runs down the hill, the way he carries himself, all those things. Do you think the fact that he was so hard against the transfer portal when it first started coming out, that now he almost feels obligated to a position that he can't go back on his word? That it's like it's almost a dispute of his character to come out and say, you know what, actually this year we are going to take a quarterback, or hey, we do need to take a cornerback because that room's looking a little thin. Because as soon as they do, he's going to get torched for it. Like, he's going to be called a hypocrite. There's going to be all these sound bites of him saying, we're never going to go into the portal, it's not Clemson, yada yada yada. So do you think that the fear of him having to deal with that is what's making him kind of say, just stick to his guns right now?
Well, my mom once told me never say never, and for this reason exactly, of if you say, like, you never know what's going to happen in the future, you never know what positions you're going to put yourself in the future, so don't ever say never. And I think that that does somewhat maybe play a role, but at that point, like, just get over yourself, dude. Like, you're a grown man, you run a college football program, your job is to win football games and run a successful program and continue to be one of the best coaches in all of college football. And part of that job is adapting to change and doing things differently and going with the flow of things in college football. And so that's why you can't say things like that. But I was going to bring up the point of, like, do you think we perceive Dabo and Clemson the same way if he never made those comments? Like, let's say Dabo never makes a comment about the transfer portal and not taking players from the portal, and he just kind of goes about business, doesn't make any comments about it, and continues to not take portal players. Like, do you think that changes the narrative of all of, like, oh, well, maybe he's just trying to do things differently, like maybe he sees this a different way? Because what it is really is, like, everybody's like, you put your foot in your mouth, Dabo. That's what's happening right now, and you're holding true to what you said, but it's biting you in the butt.
I don't know if it changes the narrative, because, I mean, you'll still get the graphic every year of Clemson has taken 0 players in the transfer portal, and it's kind of like, hey, why aren't you doing this? I think the attention around the narrative and the blasphemous kind of attitude people have towards it is much less. Like, because obviously if Dabo's not coming out and saying, oh, we're not taking any transfers, or the transfers we do take are high schoolers, ha ha ha, being cheeky about that, I don't think he's as inclined to be criticized. But I do think at some point people are going to look around and be like, hey, why are we not taking transfers? Like, the roster we've had over the last 4 years has steadily declined, and it's almost in correlation with the rise of the transfer portal. Like, Clemson has progressively gotten worse as the transfer portal has progressively become more prevalent in college football. So I think it's fair to assume that is one of the reasons as to why now, obviously, recruiting, you've lost a lot of coaches, losing Brent Venables didn't help, things such as that. But you have to be able to say, like, hey, we should probably take shots there. So I do think that the narrative that, hey, Clemson needs to get into the transfer portal probably doesn't change, but you're probably not going to see as much heavy criticism for Dabo Swinney because of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's going to continue to be a talking point until like, honestly, what I thought was going to happen is they were just going to take, like, this low end transfer and take one, and then Dabo was going to run with that, and he was just, like, going to hang his hat on that one and be like, well, I did use a portal, like, I got me a player out of there, and his luck, they'd probably end up a meaningful contributor for them, and he would just continue to run with that. But that has not been the case. Dabo continues to hold true to his words, and you know what? He is consistent, and we always commend consistency around here. So we'll see what happens with Clemson this year. They got a tough schedule for them ahead as they got to open up with Georgia, but the ACC overall, not exactly this gauntlet, at least not what it even was last year. So perhaps they could still have some success, and Dabo can continue to hold true to his words. But I know we already kind of welcomed you guys in already beforehand, but we got some more people joining in on the show, so we want to go ahead and welcome you in again officially Thursday here in the NBR Hour. We got a lot more topics to cover over here. We got a couple lists, some big time lists that we want to talk about. Top 100 players of college football, top 25 coaches of college football as well. We'll see where Dabo Sweeney is on that mix. Steve Spurrier kind of set the bar for Billy Napier and the Ford program this year. We're going to hit on those comments as well. The expanded college football playoff is already hitting snags, and they might have already run into some trouble about what it means to actually have a 12-team playoff, and in the future, a 14-team playoff. Mike Elko himself might have himself a guy at quarterback. We'll talk about some comments that are made there. And then, of course, the new video game, some more details got released, so we want to talk about that. Did the ACC get snubbed on some things? And which legends do we want to see in the new video game? But before we attack some of those topics, we want to go ahead and give a quick shout-out to our friends over at Prize Picks. Use promo code Brooks today to get 100% 100% deposit match. You put $100 in, you get $100 back. If you aren't using Prize Picks yet, we shout them out every single day. So if you're a consistent listener and you haven't gone over there yet and use that promo code, what are you doing? Go support them because they support us. All right. Where do you want to go from here, Christian? You can lead the way right here.
You're getting better and better at that.
Well, we've done this for like 5 times now, solo show. So get some more reps in. You get a better flow of things.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's like a separate show almost.
I know it does.
So, but no, going back to Dabo Swinney, despite all of this, I think he's a top 10 coach in college football. It's like you have to show respect to that. And again, his actions have always been consistent with what he says, so we have to respect that. And I think that I'm not going to criticize him if there ever does come a day where he does finally get into the transfer portal, because it'll be, hey, you know what? Props to Dabo for finally realizing this is something in college football that you have to utilize. But where did he end up on this top 25 list?
So Dabo came in at number 3. He's right behind Ryan Day at number 2. And then obviously Kirby Smart comes in at number 1.
Agreed.
But here's my question I want to ask. Like, say Dabo over the next 10 years, he never wins another national title. Maybe he wins a couple more conference championships. He wins the ACC. Let's say this ACC continues to stick around. We remain in the same format. Things remain the same in college football, even though that is very unlikely to happen. But in this world, that's what happens. ACC remains intact. The Power 4 remains intact. And things kind of just remain the same. How far removed does Dabo have to get from his 2 national titles before he just starts dropping in the ranks? Because, like, for example, I think of Sonny Dykes. Sonny Dykes made the national championship. He didn't win the national championship, but he made the national championship with TCU. And he came in at, let's see, right here at number 22. He's 22 on the list. Again, I know he didn't win the national title. They had a rough year last year. But, I mean, we're a year removed from TCU going to the national title, and he's at number 22. So how far removed do we have to get from coaches winning national titles before we start having that impact the rankings? Because the whole reason why Dabo's at 3, we have to assume, is because they did win 2 national titles.
He's won the most national titles out of active coaches, correct? I mean, him and Kirby Smart are tied at 2.
Yeah.
So I guess the question of that begs, if Clemson's not winning titles, are they at least competing for them? Are they at least making runs in the college football playoff? Like, are they at least sniffing a national title? Because the last 3 years, they haven't come close to one, and I think that's really put a hurt on Dabo Swinney's legacy. But if Clemson's consistently hanging around the top 10, they're consistently in the playoff, they're consistently winning ACC championships, I think you can still say, hey, Dabo Swinney's a top 5, maybe a top 10, maybe even a top 5 coach in college football. But if Clemson gets to a point now where they're consistently going 8-4, 9-3, maybe throw in a 7-5 season there, I think you have to say, all right, well, what Dabo Swinney did in that 2015 to 2020 run, because they went to the playoff that year, that was really special. But we have to at least acknowledge now that time of Dabo Swinney's career is over, and the sport of college football has kind of passed him by.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would agree with you there. And so, like, remain in the top 10, that keeps you as one of the best coaches in college football, obviously. Like, I mean, if you're perennially, and 2, if you're a top 10 team every year,
correct,
you're in the playoff every single year as well. So that in and of itself is an accolade to keep on hitching your hat to and whatnot. But I mean,
hitching your hat.
Yeah, I kind of messed that one up a little bit. I stumbled over my. I didn't know what I wanted to say, and it just kind of.
It's a live show, right there. It's gonna.
But I think, too, what Dabo's going to run into trouble is because college football is changing. You're not going to have the luxury of playing an ACC conference schedule every single year.
Nope.
And eventually you're going to get placed into whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten. And that's going to create a tougher schedule for you every single year. And at that point, I mean, things have to change, or else you are going to keep falling down these lists. So some other notable ones that I think are worth mentioning from this list, I'll just go ahead and rattle off the top 10. So again, Kirby Smart at number 1. This comes from CBS, by the way. Kirby Smart number 1, Ryan Day number 2, Dabo Swinney number 3, Brian Kelly number 4, Steve Sarkisian in the top 5 at number 5,
really?
Kyle Whittingham at number 6, Kalen DeBoer at number 7, so he's top 10 after last year's run with Washington, Mike Norvell as well in the top 10 at number 8 with Florida State, Dan Lanning now in the top 10 with Oregon, and Lincoln Riley rounding out the top 10 at USC.
See, that's very weird for me because it seems very accolades based. Like you have Sarkisian in front, you have Kalen DeBoer in front. All those guys had playoff runs in front of Dan Lanning. Excuse me. All those guys had playoff runs. One made the national title. It seems that okay, the list is kind of based on it rewards you for hey, these guys made playoffs. That makes them cream of the crop. That's why they're ahead of Dan Lanning. And then it's Lincoln Riley, a guy who went to the playoff 4 or 5 years in a row. Now, granted, it was at a different school, but that's only 3 seasons removed. And oh, by the way, he just put a number 1 pick in the NFL draft. So, if you're going to have Dan Lanning behind Steve Sarkisian and Kalen DeBoer and Kyle Whittingham, I guess I get it. Why is Lincoln Riley behind him too?
I guess the biggest thing, like, I think what gets people with Kyle Whittingham is that he was consistently winning Pac-12 titles for a couple years there with the Utes, and he just consistently has good teams for where Utah is and the proximity of talent that Utah has to players. Like, they're a good football team. They're always well coached, and that shows signs of like Kyle Whittingham is a good coach. So I think that's just kind of the vibe around Kyle Whittingham. Plus, too, we've continued to say this offseason that Utah should be the favorite to win the Big 12. They should win the conference. They should make the playoff this year. So it's definitely a big tipping point for Whittingham. Like, you need to play well in the Big 12. You should be the number one team in that conference, and you should be a playoff team playing against that bunch now that you're out of the Pac-12. So a big year for him. Time will tell with him. But other than that, I thought it was a pretty good list. I think of the top 10 coaches, I would say those are the names that are probably the most deserving of it.
Who's on the outside looking in?
James Franklin's at number 11.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
That's pretty fair, to be honest. Like, Penn State, usually a top 12 team, like around the 11 to 15 range usually every single year. Top 25 team perennially. So that makes sense for him to be right on the outside. Lane Kiffin at 14. I think that might honestly.
Two in front of him.
I can't read that. Chris Kleeman from Kansas State, and then Lance Leipold from Kansas. So the two Kansas coaches, those two are ahead of Lane Kiffin. Mike Gundy comes in at 15.
Just consistent.
Luke Fickell at 17. Kirk Ferentz
at 18.
Yeah.
Why? Kirk Ferentz is an interesting situation to me because, I mean, obviously, like 18th best coach in college football isn't a super prestigious award. Like, it's not a prestigious title, but it's also like Iowa's defense has carried that team for so long, and the offense has been so putrid that you would expect a coach that is worth salt can do something about it to get it fixed. Like, every elite coach has had offensive issues and has done things to fix them. Nick Saban got Alabama's offense out of the Stone Age. Kirby Smart got it out of the Stone, or not even the Stone Age, but running heavy. They hired Todd Monken. Steve Sarkisian's elevated. He's made Texas's defense better. Hell, even Lincoln Riley has made steps to make USC's defense better. Like, what Brian Ferentz just hasn't really done. Kirk Ferentz, my bad. Brian Ferentz is the son.
Yeah.
Kirk Ferentz hasn't done anything, in my opinion, to make Iowa's offense any better.
Yeah.
So
he'd be one heck of a DC, it seems like. You go be a defensive coordinator, you'd be one of the top defensive coordinators in the country. And I think that is why he's at 18th, because if you can make at least one side of the football great, and I mean one of the best every single year, then obviously you're doing something right. Obviously you are one of the better coaches if you're able to do that. But the offensive struggles, that's definitely a sign of concern. But again, 18th really is no cause of concern for me. Mark Stoops came in at 20th, and Eli Drinkwitz right behind him at 21st. Josh Heupel is this is the one that I kind of disagree with. Josh Heupel comes in behind both Eli Drinkwitz and Mark Stoops.
Really?
Yeah, he's 2 spots behind Drinkwitz.
Where is Drink on this list?
21st. Him and Stoops. So Stoops at 20th, Drinkwitz at 21st, and then Heupel at 23rd. Sonny Dykes in between them.
Is it just kind of, hey, you got to do it one more year, Drink?
I guess that's the same thing for Tennessee too.
I think the fact that Sonny Dykes is in front is because you took a team with the caliber of TCU and got them to the national title.
No, sure. I don't have any I think Sonny Dykes is in a good place, but I would honestly switch Josh Heupel and Eli Drinkwitz in my opinion. I think that Heupel right now, I think most people would probably take him over Eli Drinkwitz almost.
That's so tough to say because I feel like the prospect in the future of Missouri is so much higher than Tennessee football. Like, coming off that 2022 season, people are like, dude, Tennessee's back. Tennessee's competing for national titles, things such as that. And it's kind of had a comeback to earth moment. I think you might, if you see that comeback to earth moment for Missouri next year, you'll see Drink kind of fall down these lists. Because, I mean, Josh Heupel was in the top 10 of these lists last year, if I remember correctly.
He was up there.
Just because, I mean, what they did with Tennessee was like he brought Tennessee back. I mean, the revivals, he made them a national powerhouse. That offense was unstoppable, all those things. And then obviously you had a disappointing season in 2023 and they go tumbling down. So I think they're kind of setting up Drink for that same thing. Yeah,
I think that this is more of an indicator of what they think is going to happen for Missouri this year, is that they think they're going to stack 2 pretty solid years together. Maybe Missouri's a first-time playoff team this year. But I think Tennessee has the same aspirations, maybe not as high as Missouri because people are pretty high on Brady Cook and Luther Burden proven and what Missouri has out there, what they have working with them. So, but again, I think that Heupel has kind of proven more. And I mean, say what you want about them last year, while the offense wasn't great, while Joe Milton was, I mean, he was an at-risk factor for them, throwing the football into danger and just being
not
inaccurate.
the Heisman winner they thought he was going to be.
Not the Heisman winner that everybody thought he was going to be, or most our Tennessee fans thought he was going to be. They improved on defense, and that was kind of the big question for Heupel in Tennessee is, can you make the defensive side of the football better? Because we know that offense is going to work out for you when you have the right players. And this year, it looks like they're going to have the right players offensively. It's just a matter of, can James Pearson, that defense, replicate what they did last year? I don't know that they will be able to. They lost some players, and it's not going to be the same defense that they had last year. But I think that Heupel, he's stacked in 2 good seasons now, or 2 respectable seasons at Tennessee for a program that was on the low ranks of the SEC East for like a few years, or quite a while. And so I think that Tennessee and Heupel are a little more proven than what Drinkowitz in Missouri has done so far.
I agree with that. Who's 24 and 25?
24 and 25. Marcus Freeman at 24th.
Interesting.
And then Matt Campbell at 25th. People keep on holding on to that.
No
Matt
Matt
Campbell.
Brown, huh?
No Matt Brown.
Was Stoops on here?
Stoops is 20th.
Okay. No Mac Brown's interesting, I think. I mean,
I guess that's the answer of how far away from national titles do you have to be for nobody to give a crap about them.
Yeah, and I mean, it was what? You're going on, God, that's almost 20 years ago now.
Almost.
Jeez, you were old as shit. But
the fresh college grads.
But yeah, I mean but no, yeah, you won it with a different team. It was almost 2 decades ago. Like, Mac Brown is not the same coach caliber that you saw at 2005 Texas. So it makes sense. It's just interesting because I feel like where that North Carolina program was and what he's been able to do at the quarterback position. Now, obviously, North Carolina doesn't always have very good defense and they kind of underachieve, but I would say they've been a more consistent program than Iowa State.
Yeah. A little surprised to me that Mike Elko was not on the list.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Elko, what he did at Duke got him a Power 5 SEC job this year.
And it kind of gives you the feel of, like, this list when you're looking at it. We kind of had some discussions about it already of they're putting a lot of merit into what you've done very recent. And Mike Elko made Duke competitive. You upset Clemson last year. He made Duke a very competitive football team, a well-coached football team. And like you just mentioned, it helped land him the job at Texas A&M. So I thought that maybe he would crack somewhere in this top 25 again. I think he's one of the better football coaches. If you can make Duke competitive as he made it last year, even in the midst of Riley Leonard having an ankle injury and you're not able to play him, like, you deserve at least a golf clap for that, and you deserve at least a mention or something like that in the top 25.
I mean, I would argue Brent Key deserves to be on this list as well. Like, what that Georgia Tech program was 3 years ago.
He should be an honorable mention at
2
least.
years ago when he took over it. I mean, to what it is now, like, they gave Georgia everything they wanted to handle. I mean, they're going to be a bowl team this year at least.
Should be.
So yeah, I would say Brent Key deserves more than Matt Campbell, but I guess for having that one season at Iowa State and then kind of riding the hype train and making them a consistent 7-5, 6-6 program now, like, he deserves a tip of the hat for that.
Brock Purdy made Matt Campbell, huh?
Maybe, dude.
I mean, people are certainly still holding on to that one.
Do you think Brock Purdy was ever a top 100 player?
Probably not. I don't know. It's hard for me to even remember like what college football was like when Brock Purdy was playing.
It wasn't that long ago.
I know it wasn't even that long ago, but like I can't even tell you like if he was even in these types of discussions of like if people were even talking about Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
But
there was an updated top 100 list, right?
There was. So I believe the last one we reacted to was from CBS. And now we're going to do a little flip-flop here. We're going to go to On3. On3 released their top 100 list today. We're not going to read every single name off of you because that would be long, that would be boring, and that would just be dumb. We don't want to bore you guys.
Bad content.
That's bad content. That's exactly what that is. But we'll just kind of give you a synopsis, some of our reactions to some of the ratings, what we agree with, what we disagree with, and things that kind of popped out to us. The big thing, James Pierce from Tennessee, a player we just mentioned, the edge. He is the number one player in the country. A lot of people are very high on James Pierce, obviously. He was the number one player on the other list, and some people think that he has potential to go number one overall in the upcoming draft this next year. He's put up great numbers for the Volunteers, and he has an opportunity to really shine this next year as well and be one of the top edge defenders. I think most people think it's him and Mykel Williams that are going to be the top edge defenders in college football, but he stuffs the stat sheet more than anybody else at that position, and so he gets all of the glory for it, respectively. Right. But still, putting him at number one, and I don't want to say this to say like sound ignorant or anything like that, but it almost feels like James Pierce, the hype around him just came out of nowhere.
I think it's because NFL mock drafts think he's going to be the first player taken, which it's likely, first defensive player taken, which it's likely he will be. And we're also in a year where there's not a lot of offensive star power coming back. Like, there's Quinn Ewers, there's Carson Beck, but other than that, like, there's no Caleb Williams coming back, there's no Marvin Harrison, there's no Brock Bowers. You don't really have these proven entities on offense, like these proven superstars that are coming back. So I think people are kind of viewing this as like, hey, this is the year of the defense, especially, I mean, it was the first 12 players in the NFL draft this year were all offensive. So I guess this is kind of the pendulum swinging back, and now people are like, hey, what's going on with all these defenses? So it makes sense that James Pierce is number one right now.
I mean, I understand it. You put up big numbers like he does, and you flash the way he does on the football field, you're certainly one of the top players in college football, and you do it on a consistent basis. This one was the bigger shock to me in the top 5. Luther Burden at number 2. I think that he is probably the best receiver in college football right now. Just like as a preseason talk, because we haven't really seen everything else play out, and there's still some questions for some other wide receivers, some guys some new landing spots, going to see how they play in certain positions in certain places. But second best player in the country, I don't know, that's a little too steep for me.
I guess, I mean, this reverts back to my original point of like, he's the one offensive commodity in college football. You're like, hey, star power, like he was one of the best receivers last year. He's the only one coming back, really. There's no Xavier Worthy, there's no AD Mitchell. It seems like a lot of the elite talent from last year has gone to the NFL, and Luther Burden's one of the last few remaining. So
I'm trying to see who the next receiver that they ranked is. Travis Hunter's at 20th
as a receiver, or just
they listed him at both.
Okay.
Emeka Ibuka 18th.
Valid.
Let's see if they have any others ahead of him. The McMillan kid out of Arizona. He's a really good one. I think he's going to play well this next year. And just, again, a guy that stuffs his stat sheet. But so those are the top receivers on this list within the top 25. Those names I just talked about.
Makes sense.
Some other big surprises to me, or some that might surprise others, is they put Malachi Starks as the first safety on the board at number 9.
That's fair.
And then Caleb Downs was not listed until 22nd. So a 13-player gap between him and Caleb Downs.
Are these based on you can't even say draft predictions because he's not eligible next year, Caleb Downs. So I don't know. I think Malachi Starks and Caleb Downs are 1A and 1B when it comes to safeties in college football. Maybe they dropped him because of the prospect of, hey, he's with a new team. He might have to have some adjusting to do, whereas Malachi Starks is going to be the veteran on that defense. He's proven for 2 years straight that he is a guy, whereas was Caleb Downs' year kind of a freshman success story, and he's got to adjust now. That's the only reason I could justify dropping him 13 spots below Malachi Starks. I don't think that's fair, honestly.
Yeah, the last list that we looked at, I believe that it was Malachi Starks at 14th and then Caleb Downs at 15th or something like that. They were back-to-back, and it was like when you were reading the list, it was, this guy definitely forgot Malachi Starks and Caleb Downs, so he just put him back-to-back. But it's probably not actually like a 13-player gap. Like, that's not how this actually works out. It's not like they're just saying like Malachi Starks is 13 spots better than Caleb Downs. They are 1A and 1B, though. I think everybody agrees that they're the top 2 safeties in the country. Malachi Starks is going to be one of the first defensive players off the board, probably a top 15 pick, definitely a top 20 pick next year if everything plays out the way it should.
First safety off the board for sure. So, who's next on the list?
The quarterbacks were a little interesting and a little vindictive, I think, of some feelings that people have. Carson Beck was the first quarterback at number 4. Quinn Ewers at number 12. So he was the second one behind Beck, and he came in at number 12, Beck number 4. And then Shadur was the third one. Where do you think he was?
Was it within the top 25?
It was not.
Wow. 26 then.
Yeah, he was 26.
Okay. So
he was right on the outside looking in.
That's interesting. I mean, it's fair. Like, Shadur was, for as consistent and as good as he was last year, you're still on a team that's got a lot of question marks. He had a couple of performances last year where it was like, I mean, I feel like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers were models for consistency last year. Quinn Ewers is probably not as high on this list because he's never played a complete season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, there's a very real chance that Arch Manning starts a game this year because Quinn Ewers has an injury. Well, I don't hope that happens, but based on the last 2 seasons, like, you have to assume that something's going to happen. So that's probably the only reason why I can justify an 8-spot gap, but I don't think that it's that deep between Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of the order but it's, there's and it goes to show like how big of a conversation it is and how much of a discrepancy there is between people's quarterback rankings and how people feel about these three, because people for the most part agree that these are the top three quarterbacks in this upcoming class, that it is Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, and Shedeur. But some people feel that Shedeur has the higher ceiling. He's going to translate better to the NFL because he can use his legs more than Ewers and Beck, and he's just an overall better playmaker with his feet and like as a dual threat type guy. Whereas Beck and Ewers are probably the better passers. They have better arm talent, so they're just your better pure quarterbacks. It all kind of just depends on what caters more to your liking. But I think Beck is probably the most polished of all the three. Like, he's the most NFL ready. Like, if you had to start an NFL team today and you had to pluck a quarterback from the college level to start your franchise with, I think people would probably go with Beck because he feels the most NFL ready. Because Ewers, like you mentioned, has not played a full season. Shedeur, while his ceiling is high and he is a playmaker and he still has great arm talent, he can do all the great things that you want a quarterback to do, there still feels like there's room to grow. So he's more of like, not necessarily a project, but there's a couple more steps that he needs to take before he gets like to this NFL ready standpoint.
I agree with that. I mean, just there's more question marks around Shedeur. Like, he's only really been in the spotlight for 1 year, and I know that's kind of unfair to say because truthfully Carson Beck's only been in the spotlight 1 year and Quinn Ewers has been in for 1.5, but yeah. I feel like there's a lot more questions around Shedeur's game simply just because of the circumstances of Colorado football and what Carson Beck has done so far and Quinn Ewers have done playing at the highest stages. Like, I mean, Quinn Ewers was in the playoff last year. Carson Beck was in the Heisman race up until they lost to Bama in the SEC championship game.
The last thing I had to say about this list, and I know this isn't a Georgia hour, so I'm not going to really expound upon it a whole lot, but Michael Williams is one of the most misunderstood players in all of college football right now because he came in at number 97th in the country. So I just said that people, I would like to think that people think it's James Pierce and Michael Williams as the top two edge defenders in college football right now.
List doesn't think so.
And James Pierce number 1, and then Michael Williams all the way down at number 97. What are we doing?
I mean, it's clear that their stat sheet. Look, I mean, he had what? 4?
I mean, for these lists, it's hard not to. You're not going to go through majority of college football players and watch their film and grade them and everything like that. So I understand it's hard not to do that, but at the same time, very misunderstood player.
Very misunderstood. I mean, I feel like defensive players, if you're not putting stats up, like if you're a DB and you don't have 5 interceptions on a year, or if you're a linebacker and you don't have 150 tackles, like people, that's the only way they can gauge how you are as a player. So it is tough.
You want to go ahead and get into this video game talk? I know you've probably been itching just to get into this part of the show.
I've been waiting the whole show.
You've been waiting the whole show for this. I think this is a good part where we can go ahead and talk about this. I know there's some people where they think it's a little silly to talk about a video game, but I think it is just it is clearly one of the biggest talking points in college football right now. I mean, if you Google college football today, you could go through 8 pages on Google, and every single one of the articles that you're going to see is going to be talking about this college football video game. So they've officially released the date that is going to officially come out, June 19th. That is when the game is going to come out, but then you
July
19th. But you can also order the deluxe version. You get 3 days access beforehand, all this other good stuff. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is, one, ACC kind of got snubbed a little bit on this, don't you think?
And the fact that they're not on the cover?
Yeah, the other 3 conferences got a player on the cover, but ACC did not.
I mean, here's the thing about the ACC. Like, who's the star player in the ACC
That was what I was trying to think of today, and there really isn't one.
Like, I mean,
Malik Murphy.
Maybe, but like
he hasn't even played in the conference.
Murphy just got to that conference. Like, there's not really a star in the, like, if you had a Trevor Lawrence, or if you had even a guy on Florida State last year, like if you had even like a Jordan Travis last year, or someone of name in the ACC right now, you probably won't have this issue. And I mean, it makes sense, honestly. Like, I don't think they're throwing shade at the ACC. I just think that the star power that you have right now is not enough to warrant putting someone on the cover of a video game.
Yeah,
I don't think the ACC should feel slighted. I mean, if you do, like, get more stars.
Yeah, I guess the only real one that's like who's been kind of an ACC lifer at this point, has played multiple years, is Cade Klubnik with Clemson, but he doesn't really garner the star power that Travis Hunter, Quinn Ewers, and Donovan Edwards garner. So, I mean, I kind of get it, but I just thought it was a little interesting, like every single conference but the ACC.
And I mean, you could get really technical and be like, is the SEC really represented because Texas is there?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, true. Texas is in the SEC this year, but they haven't been an SEC team for years. Like, this is their first year literally in the SEC. So, Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, the cover, in my opinion, was something that you could have made a blank-ass cover and just put college football on it, and I would have bought the game. Like, that's not why
I think there were some early talks of that's what people thought they were going to do, is they were literally just going to put college football 25 and just on like a white sheet of paper.
I'll
almost
still pay as much money as you want for
absolutely. This is the fun conversation. I thought we could get into this. I think we've kind of done it before. But I think it's a good one to start because it is confirmed that Ultimate Team is going to be put into this game. And if you aren't familiar, Ultimate Team is where you collect all these cards, whether it's past players or present players, and you make this entire team of just whoever you want, whichever card you like, whichever players you want. So which Ultimate Team, which legends specifically need to be in Ultimate Team the most? Which of them need a card? Or which ones do you want?
So obviously you have to think of that gap where there weren't college football games coming out and the players that you missed out on. So I thought, we need a Lamar Jackson. We need a Baker Mayfield. We need a Bijan Robinson, like Rodrigo Blankenship, guys like that. They're just legendary. That would be so cool to play within this game. And then I thought of a couple others that would be a lot of fun that were technically in the game but didn't get the the name, image, and likeness part of it in. So I'll list those after you get yours. I don't want to step on your toes because I have a lot.
I know he was already in the game, but RG3, he's just one of the most fun quarterbacks that I ever used in the old games, and I think he'd be fun in one of these modern games. Sean Taylor, that's kind of a give me for a defensive guy. Like, that's, come on, you need a big hitter back in the secondary. Just make highlight clips, replays, expose your friends all the time with him. Bo Jackson, or like any of these historic running backs. Like, I even almost put Leonard Fournette or these type, like some guys that have kind of already gotten forgot about, but would just be absolutely fun to use. Like, bring back some fun to like running the football, because everybody just wants to air it out in these video games. But if you got if you got one of these old school running backs like Herschel Walker or Bo Jackson or any of those types of players in the backfield, those would be fun to use. This is my favorite one that I would like to use. I know I picked guys that have, for the most part, have already been in the video games, but a player like Percy Harvin would be so much fun in Ultimate Team. Would be
a lot of fun in Ultimate Team.
And I think that he deserves a card because it didn't really work out for him in the NFL. He had some solid years in Minnesota briefly, but he was just an electric player at Florida, and he's like the essence of electricity in a video game, of a player that you can just do whatever, and he's probably a broken player at that part.
Yeah, for sure. I have Michael James from Oregon on that, kind of similar. So just so fast, just kind of can have him anywhere. Running wheels out of the backfield would be so dangerous. For the defensive legends, I had the Boz. I think that neck pad and the Boz would be so much fun to play with on Ultimate Team. And then Cam Newton's obviously another one. He was obviously in the game, but he wasn't in the game. Oh God, very funny, Marion. But the one that, and this is a deep pool, and this will mean something to someone, I know it, Ryan Switzer. Ryan Switzer would be such a sneaky good player. If you don't know who Ryan Switzer is, go look up Ryan Switzer North Carolina highlights. That guy was the definition of electricity while he was there on the Tar Heels.
Georgia fans should know who he is. They should remember for when they played against him in 2016 in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. I just had a name. Tavon Austin. I mean, come on. It's got to be a gimme almost, right? That he gets one of these cards in Ultimate Team. There's so many names that you could list, like Brock Bowers, if you want to play the Homer card here. Go with a tight end, probably the best tight end in all of college football history. Like, he's got to get one. Darnell Washington would be a fun one. I remember the crazy thing about Darnell Washington is, like, even if you wanted to create Darnell Washington in the old video game, you couldn't, because it was impossible to make a 6'7", 250-pound, 270-pound tight end in the football game. Like, they just would not allow you to make him. So I think it'd be fun to have him in there just because he is such an anomaly and he does things so differently. So, like, those two guys would be great cards. Roquan Smith, another one from the Georgia crowd. I think all of those ones. Julio Jones, that's a good wide receiver to give a shout out to. But yeah, more so of guys of recent. You're right. It should be the guys from like 2015 until now, of like every single player that should have gotten a card that never got a card.
Oh, I just thought of one. Reuben Foster would be so much fun to play with in that game.
There's some big time Alabama defensive players that deserve to be on there for sure.
Definitely.
So yeah, all of those players should be, and I think that's probably how they're going to do it. Is they're probably going to get those types, because the crowd that is going to be playing this game the most, like our age, those are the players that they're going to remember. Those are the players that they're going to really connect with. So I imagine that's probably how they're going to gear it towards. Where do you want to go from here?
So, I mean, the only other things we have left are the playoff hitting a snag or Spurrier, kind of setting the bar for Florida. So I'll let you pick.
We can quickly hit on the playoff hitting a snag, because I don't think this one will take too long, but it does provide an interesting discussion. So they've slowly started leaking out college football schedules, but they've also been doing this for the NFL. They all got released yesterday. The social media pages have been having a blast with it, as they usually do. But one of the bigger talking points was that the NFL scheduled 2 games on one of the days that the college football playoff is supposed to be played, and everybody thinks it's kind of the NFL sending a big old middle finger to the college football playoff and college football in and of itself. And, we were talking of like, well, you know what, if it's just like the Browns versus whoever, or, like what some of these teams that not necessarily a whole lot of people care about in the NFL, then the playoffs should be fine. But that is not the case for these 2 games. It's the Chiefs versus the Texans and the Steelers versus the Ravens. That's a big rivalry up there as well.
Yeah,
so it's 2 keynote big market games, and you'd have to imagine like that's going to take a big hit from the ratings on the college football playoff, and it could like be one of these massive cons that we kind of mentioned before of this could happen for the expanded playoff that maybe people didn't really think about a whole lot.
And these are regular season games, right?
Regular season. This is not NFL playoff games.
You're all right. Let's be. There is going to be a dip in ratings from playoff games when you're not having the NFL on. There's obviously you're going to have that. I don't think it's going to be as drastic as people are saying. Like people aren't like the NFL is not going to swallow college football. I don't think, at least.
I mean, NFL is king for a reason.
NFL is king, that's for sure.
They draw in a lot of ratings.
The Super Bowl pulls in 3 times as many people as a college football national championship. I get it, but I think that the fact that you're going to have a new system of college football happen. Like these are new games. These are games that have never been played before. You've never had a quarterfinal in the college football world.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, there's gonna be kind of an excitement and a buzz around that. And I also like we're at a point now where you can watch more than one game at a time. Like this idea, like this isn't the 90s where it's you get one game, you get one TV, you can pick one channel, and that's what you got to watch, and maybe you flip back and forth between the two. Like, I think everyone has multiple TVs in their living room at this point, or there's multiple people who've watched the game on TV and they've got the other on their laptop. Like people are still going to tune in and watch this game. I don't think it's going to be as drastic as a drop off as everyone's saying it will be.
So for context, the NFL averaged 17.9 million viewers per game last year. That's regular season games. That doesn't even include the playoffs and the Super Bowl. So 17.9 on average for the NFL in the regular season. And then if you think about like the most watched games of college football last year, like I think Georgia had a couple games where they got up to 8 million people watching. Some games, of course, got up into the double-digit range. And that's for like the biggest of biggest games in college football in the regular season. And so the NFL averaging almost 20 million viewers per game for the regular season. That just kind of shows you the difference. And so I'm just interested to see how big of a difference it is, because I mean, it is going to become a talking point, and I think it is going to impact how they schedule things, because the playoff committee talks about how they're like, do we want to play these games on a Thursday? Which I agree. Thursday's not exactly ideal. I don't think that college football fans would want playoff games being played on a Thursday, because that just kind of sucks. It's like when you play these playoff games on Mondays, like, why are you doing that? That's the worst scheduling ever. It doesn't make sense. But it's just, I think it is going to have a major impact.
I mean, let's also not forget the most important part of this. The quality of the game is going to determine who stays and watches.
Sure.
Like that Georgia TCU national championship was one of the most least watched national championships of all time.
Because 15 minutes.
Within the first 20 minutes, it was a 20-point game. Like you realize it was over. Like if Alabama and say Michigan hypothetically are in a playoff game and it's a nail biter like the Rose Bowl last year, and the Texans are beating the shit out of the Chiefs, like these are all hypotheticals, obviously. Like people aren't going to tune into the Texans game as much. They're going to go over to the Bama game. So it's not only you have to this is where the college football expansion kind of is either going to work out really well in their favor or it's not. It's not just, you're competing with the NFL. It's the product that you put out. The call for expansion came because, hey, the semifinal games weren't doing well. It was always blowouts. It seemed like the committee was always getting it wrong, so we need to add more teams so we can have a chance for better games happening. If you're going to get the same blowouts and 30-point losses in the games, you're going to see that reflect in the viewers, and especially with NFL games on now, it's going to be made more aware. So I think that's going to be the most important thing, is what is the product that you're putting out for viewers to watch?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the biggest thing for me is that since it is the Texans versus the Chiefs, you're getting CJ Stroud in year 2 versus Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league. That already is enticing of itself. And especially if the Texans continue to be the playoff caliber team and they continue to be on this upward hill climb of being one of the better teams in the NFL. And obviously the Chiefs keep on dominating with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid like they have. That's going to be a matchup that everybody wants to watch, and I believe that one's slated for 7:30. The 4:30 game is Ravens versus Steelers, and you'd imagine it's probably when the college football playoff game is going to be kicking off, probably around 6:30, 7:30, just kind of depending on what they do there. But I'm interested to see how it all plays out, because I think this is going to be like what skews the decision for upcoming years, because you're going to 14. this next year. That's going to create even more games, even more scheduling conflicts. But some people definitely thought that it was the NFL saying, F you, college football. We do not care about you, and we are not scared of you.
I don't know if it was the NFL being spiteful as much as it was like, we're not going to adjust our... I mean, the NFL's always done this. The NFL is always, when college football regular season ends, when you get to like mid-July, like late or mid-January, late January, the NFL always does regular season games on Saturday just to kind of attract more viewers in. I think that's the NFL kind of saying, no, we're not going to change just because you've created a new format for your product.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're going to also see the networks. Like, I don't know who's broadcasting those games, but you have to imagine that ESPN is going to broadcast all the college football playoff games. Now, if it's Fox or whoever else, NBC, doing the playoff game or the NFL regular season games, you might see a little more pushing from each side. So there's going to be competition either way. I think it's a good thing. I think that, it's probably going to hurt your viewership if you're a college football playoff just because you're having to go up against NFL games. But at the end of the day, if you put a product on the field that's better than what the NFL is putting out right now, like... and I truly believe that college football at its best is better than the NFL at its best.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because the wild, the craziness stuff of it, the amateurism, that sense of amateurism that you have, you can't really match that in the NFL.
No, I agree. Atmosphere-wise, it is unmatched. College football creates something that nothing else can ever replicate. Like, it is a king. It is a better product for those reasons that you just listed. I absolutely agree with that. But you talked a little bit about pushing and shoving a little bit. There's some pushing and shoving a little bit down in Gainesville, Florida. And Spurrier had some more comments to say about Billy Napier. And it almost feels like Spurrier's just kind of like, same old year, same old expectations. But there are some interesting things that we wanted to talk to you guys about and bring up. So here's a quote that Spurrier said about talking about the Florida program expectations for this next year. He said, the anticipation and expectations are about the same as last year, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Billy Napier got a bunch of new coaches. Seems like they're going to be more demanding, make the guys more accountable. Seems like a leadership of Graham Mertz and some of those other guys is going to be there. And then he goes on to say, so the schedule's tough, but everybody's got a tough schedule now, just about in the SEC. So we'll wait and see. I picked them to go 8-4 and win a bowl game. And if we do that, we can do cartwheels and somersaults around here. We'll be a happy bunch of Gators.
So 8-4 is like...
That's the bar, apparently.
Not even the bar. That's like, hey, this was a massive success of a season. Like, great job, Billy Napier. You coached your ass off. You did it. Like, we are so proud of you. 8-4. Now, on paper, obviously, now we know what the Florida schedule is, and we know what kind of has been going on in that program. Like, it's kind of a mess right now from an outsider's perspective. So 8-4 seems like a disaster, especially when it seems like not even. Well, I mean, it was almost 20 years ago, but you were competing for national titles and you're the most dominant programs ever. The Swamp and Tim Tebow and all that with Urban Meyer. Like, the kind of downfall of Florida football where one of your greatest head coaches is saying, hey, if we go 8-4, we'll be doing cartwheels and somersaults and we'll be so happy. Like, I understand that, but that's a realistic bar. If you're Steve Spurrier in the Florida Gators and Billy Napier.
It's funny to think because the year that the most recent success for Florida was a year that they went 8-4 with Dan Mullen in 2020 when they almost beat Alabama in the SEC championship game and they won the East with the Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts in that offense that Dan Mullen created. So now we're 3-4 years detached from that, and that's the bar. But 8-4 this year certainly would not feel like what 8-4 felt like in 2020. And it's just kind of funny how this is now the expectation. Like, this is the threshold that Billy Napier has to get through. But I think the more telling point in these quotes from Steve Spurrier is the fact that he's like, well, it's the same expectation as last year. And to me, while he said that doesn't mean it's bad. I think it does mean it's bad because you're going into year 3 with Billy Napier. And this is a big turning point for you. This is supposed to be the big tipping point for a head coach when you're going into year 3. And if you're just keeping things the same, if the expectations are the same as last year, that tells me you're not really showing any growth and you're not showing any signs of things getting better or any sunshine coming down on that program because it is year 3. You should be better than you were 2 years ago or even last year, but that's just not the case for Florida.
I think that the reason the expectations are kind of similar is just because your schedule got so much harder.
Yeah.
Like their 2023 schedule, let me pull it up quick. I remember it being not easy. Like no SEC schedule is easy.
I mean, it's Miami, it's Georgia.
But it wasn't.
It's Florida State.
It wasn't looking at it and being like, holy shit, we'll be happy if we go 8-4 here. So I understand why the expectations.
Utah's on there.
Yeah, that you're at Utah, at Tennessee, or versus Tennessee, at Kentucky, at Carolina, Georgia, LSU, Missouri.
That's last year's.
That's what I'm saying. I was talking about how last year.
Last year's. Okay.
Yeah, like last year's wasn't as insane. Like, I understand 2024 is an insane schedule, and I think that's kind of why your expectations of like, hey, we're going to improve haven't really come through. It's hard to say that's a bad look for Billy Napier. Like, I mean, were people expecting Georgia to win the national title in 2022 after they came off in 2021? Like, there wasn't a big like, hey, we're expecting another title.
Yeah, but Georgia was also coming off of losing 15 NFL draft picks.
Right, but like circumstances made it harder for them.
Sure. So
I'm saying like Florida's circumstances right now, the fact that you're going in a meat grinder, like arguably the toughest schedule ever assembled for a team. Like this is a schedule you would create in NCAA video games where you're like, you know what, I'm bored. I need the hardest schedule possible. That's what Florida's 2024 schedule is this year. So I understand why the expectations aren't as high, and I also understand why outsiders looking like, oh, wow, the fall of Florida football. I mean, they're expecting 8-4, and they'll be happy about that this year.
I mean, if you have a winning record, I think that is a win in many people's eyes for the Florida program, because you went 5-7 last year, so that would be improvement upon last year. So I think that's the biggest thing of if you can show improvement this year, if you can make that record look better this year with this schedule that you have, with Graham Mertz going into year 2 as a starter, and he builds upon what he did last year, then that is a win for the Florida program. Or like, even if it doesn't work out for Graham Mertz, if you can get DJ Lagway in the mix a little bit and he ends up being your quarterback and he's as good at advertise and you show improvement there, then that's what's going to create some more buy-in with Florida and buy-in for Billy Napier. And that's why I think it is almost like if you just get bowl eligible this year, Billy, you're going to be okay and you might actually survive this slate.
Yeah, and I think like you said, creating buy-in and seeing improvement in players is partially why they took Cormani McClain. Because if you take Cormani McClain, and like we said this yesterday, if you turn him into a starter in the SEC, like if you do something that Deion Sanders couldn't do at his school, like that's going to look so good for you. And at this point, like if Cormani McClain doesn't work out, like what are you getting? Like, is it going to cost you your job anyways? Like, you're probably, if you don't have a successful season this year, your job's probably on the line anyway. So why not take a shot on a guy like Cormani McClain? Because hey, maybe you get a diamond in the rough. Maybe your culture rubs off on him, and he turns into an SEC starter to where it's like, hey, wow, Billy Napier's not a bad coach. He took a guy like Cormani McClain and made him a competent player. So,
well, they certainly have enough coaches to make sure the culture rubs off on him. But it is a very low risk move for Florida. Because again, like I think I said this the other day of when we were talking about him potentially going to Florida, now he's officially committed to Florida. Of if it works out, then you get to attach your name to that, and you get to have your name in the headlines of saying Cormani McClain's playing great at Florida, despite what happened at Colorado. Billy Napier and them found them a star in the transfer portal that it seemed like nobody else was willing to take, but they took a chance on him and they brought him in, and now he's a star. But if it doesn't work out, I don't think anybody's really going to talk about it other than Cormani McClain couldn't make it work at Florida either. It's not Billy Napier couldn't get Cormani McClain to play, because then it's just going to be, well, Deion couldn't get him to play, so why did we really expect Billy Napier to get him to play? Or get him to play as good as the 5-star attachment that was put to his name. So again, it's a very low risk move, and it makes sense to me of why why not take a chance on that? Why not hope that the 5-star talents that he was blessed with end up playing out on the football field for you, and he makes impactful plays for your program this next year when you absolutely need him to?
Yeah, it makes sense as to why they did. And honestly, I hope Billy Napier can get things turned around, because the SEC is more fun. College football is more fun when Florida is good. And it is kind of, it's unfortunate to see a program like this go through a program that had such prestige at one point be in such a rut. Like, obviously, as a Georgia fan, like, you like to see that, and you're like, ha ha ha, remember the 90s. But it's difficult to watch when a program at such prestige at one point can't seem to get its footing.
Well, you know, Mike Elko might have himself a dude.
Mike Elko might have himself a dude. Who's
over
that?
at Texas A&M. So this came from an anonymous defensive coordinator. He told Bruce Feldman from The Athletic this. So again, this is a quote from a defensive coordinator in college football. Who it is, we don't know, because it's anonymous. But he says, man, and he's talking about Connor Weigman, by the way, the quarterback from Texas A&M. That's who he's referencing when he's talking in here. Man, he is very gifted and very tough. When we hit him a bunch and we affected him, but it didn't change for him. From toughness to arm strength and ability to move in and out of the pocket, he's the most complete quarterback I've seen in a while. Not saying he was the best one, but I could see in a couple of more years he will be elite. Pretty composed kid. I really thought a lot of that guy. He's scary.
Okay, I'm going to put my journalism degree to the test here. Connor Weidman has played in 4 games. At Texas
so we
A&M.
might actually be able to figure out who this coach is.
One of those games was against Auburn where he completed 8 passes on 14 attempts. I'm going to assume that's the one he got injured.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to assume that it probably wasn't Auburn's DC talking about. So that leaves
Probably
3
not.
different teams: Miami, New Mexico, and ULM. Now, in Miami and ULM, he completed like 85% of his passes for 337 yards. He lost to Miami, so I'm going to narrow it down to ULM and New Mexico, where the 2 teams were like, hey, this guy's legit.
Well, this just became a whole lot less interesting if it's coming from one of those coaches.
Yeah, and I mean, that's probably why it was anonymous, because I mean, if the New Mexico...
Breaking news, Louisiana Monroe's defense coordinator thinks Connor Weidman is a guy.
If the New Mexico DC is like, hey, you know, that SEC quarterback is really good, people are going to be like, yeah, no shit, buddy. That's why you're coaching.
Everybody looks good against you.
Yeah, so I mean, no offense, and it might not be those guys. It might have been in Miami DC. I mean, he did throw for 336 yards against Miami, but I mean, he only got sacked 1 time each game.
Yeah, I'm assuming maybe what he's saying, like we hit him a lot, is
he got knocked down and pressured.
Yeah,
I mean,
things
obviously.
like that. They got to him, just not for sacks. But it is interesting to note that in Mike Elko's first year, I think a lot of what the reaction is going to be based off of is what does Connor Weidman look like.
Right.
It is odd enough that he called him tough because he did miss pretty much all of last year due to an injury, and he is coming back off an injury. But Mike Elko said that his health is in good shape. He's going to be ready to go by the 2024 season, and he looked good in the 4 games that he did play.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of promise in here.
Yeah.
Like every game he finished, like completed the game, he threw for over 230 yards.
Yeah, I think he has a great arm. I think he will be a good SEC quarterback. So I think that, but again, this is a big telling point. But I think this is again what a big portion of the reaction for Texas A&M in year 1 under Mike Elko is what does Connor Weidman look like, and what would have been his year 2 of starting? Like, what does another offseason look like for him?
Right.
And is he returning back to form of what he looked like in the first 4 games last year?
I like it.
Alrighty, were you good?
I'm good, dude. That's going to do it for the National Hour. Stay tuned. Y'all know what's up, and we're going to talk TTD next.
Talk
so
that dog.
Stay here. We'll be right back.
Welcome into Talk the Dog, the show where we find a bone to pick and a take to give. These are not hot takes. These is dog takes. Can I talk that dog? What's up? You really like that? Let's shut up and grind some tape.
College football has been home to some of the best stories in sports. I mean, there's walk-ons, there's underdogs, there's powerhouse dynasties, and there's kind of a prompt right now going out that maybe the Georgia Bulldogs are that this year. Jay, well, you put out an article today about how Georgia might be one of the best stories in college football. And I kind of want you to outline why you think that would be.
Yeah, so I saw this article, and it was talking about what the best storylines of the 2024 college football season could potentially be. Georgia was amongst the 10 headlines that they put out there, and it was of Georgia getting back to glory, winning the national title this year. And it got me thinking of, well, Georgia was not number 1 on the list, but I think there is a world where Georgia very well could be the greatest story of the 2024 college football season. Once I laid it out and once I kind of pieced things together, I think there is a world in a way where this does become the biggest story and the greatest story of this year's season. Not the greatest story of college football history. I think the 2021 story of Georgia tops that one already. I don't think
you're not going to top that.
I don't think they're going to get back to that of a former walk-on quarterback leading you to glory, ending over a 40-plus year title drought and whatnot. But I think this year could be a pretty special story as well. So for starters, I think Carson Beck provides a great storyline. And this is a world where Georgia goes on to win the national title. So everything that I say, this is assuming that they go on and they win the title, they get their 3rd national title in 4 years. So again, Carson Beck is a great storyline of itself because he sat and waited his turn, something that a lot of quarterbacks do not do in college football anymore. And if he were to go on, win the national title, be in the Heisman race, I think that would create this new conversation and this new narrative of quarterbacks sitting and waiting their turn, because most quarterbacks don't won't even sit and wait 1 year. Carson Beck did it for 3 years.
Right.
And so I think that this could create this new conversation of, man, look what Carson Beck did. Look how this paid off for him, that he waited his turn and he developed behind closed doors. And now he's a national title winner. He was a Heisman finalist. And now he could potentially be the number 1 overall pick. So Carson Beck plays a big role in Georgia being one of the greatest stories this next year. I think Kirby Smart plays a big role in this as well, because the first year removed from Nick Saban retiring from Alabama, Kirby Smart goes on and wins the national title. And I think that would create this. I think this would make Georgia be claimed as they are the next dynasty. They are the greatest dynasty in college football right now. Kirby Smart is head above water. Everybody else right now, he's the number 1 coach. He's already labeled as that. But I think that this would just propel him even further up the list, even further up the ranks compared to everybody else. Kirby Smart is here. Second place is down here. This would just completely push that out. And I mean, 3 national titles in 4 years. That is the epitome of a dynasty and someone that looks like they're going to run college football for the foreseeable future. The next one up is if Georgia's offense continues to flourish under Mike Bobo, and you do it this year while losing Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, your 2 best passing wide receiver, or your 2 best pass catchers, and you do it with a conglomeration of your transfer portal additions. Dylan Bell has a great year. Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas, those guys that you already have. Anthony Evans, the list goes on and on. If you do that this year, that's also a major talking point of, wow, Georgia's wide receiver room probably put it all together if your offense continues to flourish. They finally did it, and they did it again without having to have the best tight end in college football history like they had to for the other 2. So I think that could play a major role in this. And also, if your offense is great, your offensive line is probably great. So despite losing Amarius Mims in the first round, maybe Georgia goes on and wins the Joe Moore Award finally. So you're talking about the best offensive line unit, the best quarterback in college football, the best coach in college football. There's a lot of goodness around this story.
It would definitely be an amazing story if they were to win it, especially after the year they had last year where arguably got snubbed out of a playoff spot, missed the opportunity for a three-peat. My problem with calling this the greatest story of the year is just because, like, the world loves underdog stories.
Yeah.
Like everyone likes the guys who beat the odds, the new favorite or the new champ, all those things. I think we're on the brink of getting Georgia fatigue from the outside world. Obviously not here, not in this space, not with the fans. Like, if Georgia wins a national title this year, comes back and wins 3 out of the 4, Carson Beck stays and proves that, hey, you don't need to transfer somewhere to have success. He's the number 1 overall pick. Like, that's an incredible story if you're a Georgia fan. And it is. And even a college football purist. But I think the common fan is going to go, oh my God, Georgia again. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about Georgia. I don't care that Carson Beck stayed 4 years. He had a stacked team around him. I don't care that Kirby Smart won without Nick Saban. It's only because Nick Saban wasn't there that he won it. Like, things such as that it's almost too easy to pick apart why it's such a great story, although I do think it is a really good story. And also, there's going to be some team this year where, you had your 2022 Tennessee, or last year it was kind of Michigan, even though there were some controversies around that. I think we're at an era of Georgia football now where they're no longer like, hey, good for Georgia, that's a really great story. Like, Georgia is public enemy number 1 at this point, which is what you've wanted for years. You want it to be hated like Bama. You wanted, the we want Georgia chants, all those things. Like, you have to understand now, though, the days of being loved and days of being a great story and people kind of rooting for you are over. Like, people do not want to see you succeed anymore.
So maybe it's not Disney-esque documentary worthy. Maybe it's not go hug your mama, cry your eyes out story worthy. But I didn't even get to finish. I think there's 2 other.
My bad.
You're fine. You made a valid point. I like the pushback, but I'll rebuttal with these 2 points. I think within the Georgia space, there's another great storyline. This probably doesn't resonate with the national media or even the national fans because they don't really get this on a level like Georgia fans do. But if Mike Bobo wins a national title as Georgia's offensive coordinator, they go on to average 40-plus points again this year, and he helps them win a national title behind a high-powered offense with Carson Beck, the wide receivers, the offensive line, the running backs, and whatnot. Man, that's a big storyline. That Mike Bobo gets a ring. Yes. He came back to Georgia despite all the hate, despite all the people that say they want to gouge their eyes out and go scream at Mike Bobo on Twitter. He got you another ring. I think that's a great storyline. And then finally, you're telling me that Georgia would win a national title in a year where they had to play Texas on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Alabama on the road, Clemson at a neutral site, a potential SEC conference championship, and in the first year of the 12-team playoff? That's a pretty sweet resume. A better resume than any other team prior to you.
Yeah, I mean, if you run the table on that schedule, like there's 2019 LSU, 2002 Miami, or 2005 Miami arguments.
Yeah.
Or like greatest teams of all time arguments if you run the table on a schedule like that. So that's where it could necessarily be one of the greatest stories if they just run through and dominate the entire season, where it's like that's the best team in college football start to finish, no questions about it. They beat the shit out of everyone. That's where you kind of have the opportunity for a great story. And yeah, the Mike Bobo story would be incredible. Like Mike Bobo, let's be honest, has done so much for this program, more than most people, most Georgia alumni in their lifetime. Played quarterback here, played offensive coordinator during the peak of the Mark Richt days, offensive coordinator now. If he wins the national championship as an offensive coordinator with a quarterback that stuck around with him for 5 years, not him specifically, but stuck around the program for 5 years, yeah, that's an amazing story, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that we've learned as Georgia fans over the last few years is that a ring can solve a lot of issues and a lot of discourse between two parties. That's for dang sure. So a ring in this scenario would certainly solve some discourse between fans and Mike Bobo. Those that do hate him, I know not everybody hates him, but the loud majority, they seem to be the ones that dislike him the most. So a national title probably would sway them into the other direction, regardless of what happens after that.
How big of an accomplishment would it be for Kirby Smart to get a third ring? Because I mean, like, obviously going back to back is big. Obviously winning your second, kind of proving like, hey, the first wasn't a fluke, is big. But what would this third ring do for Kirby's legacy, do you think?
It's like a third one, the last thing that he has to check off.
Well, no, I think there's a couple of things that you can kind of check off if you're Kirby Smart.
Because I think, like, if you look at the list of accomplishments that you want to do as a head coach, it almost feels like Kirby Smart has already checked off every single box. Like, you had a number 1 overall pick as a head coach. You broke the NFL draft record. You won not 1 but 2 national titles back to back. I mean, you've recruited at a top 3 level. You've had a number 1 recruiting class in a year before. You've done all these great things. You went on a remarkable win streak. You've won your conference before. You've gotten to the college football playoff. Like, you're a perennial contender. Like, it seems like every single box that you would want to check off for a head coach at Georgia. I know that can't really be the expectation for every head coach at every program, but for a place like Georgia, it feels like he's kind of checked off everything. So, like, is there anything else that he really needs to accomplish?
Let me start by saying, if Kirby Smart retired right now, like tomorrow, he would have a fulfilled legacy as a college football coach. He would be the greatest Georgia football coach of all time. So in that aspect, like, there's not really any other mountain to climb in that regard. I think you could say, oh, he's got to try to catch Saban. I don't think that that's a fair comparison. No. Just because the way the sport is and the format you're in, it's nothing like the Saban era. No. Like, the era that Saban dominated college football was completely different. There wasn't NIL. There wasn't as much transfer portal. There wasn't a playoff. Like, it's not fair to say, oh, Saban won 7 and Kirby won X whenever it's said and done. So I don't think chasing Saban and catching him is necessarily on the card. I do think there are a couple of things you can do. You can have a 16-0 season. You become the first head coach to do that.
You already did 15-0.
Yeah, I mean, you could produce a Heisman winner. And I think that the next big goal for Kirby Smart is to kind of have your own iconic era of football. The 2010s was the Nick Saban and the Alabama era of football. Like, there's no doubt about that. Like, they dominated from 2009 to 2020. Like, that entire period is the Nick Saban college football Alabama era of football. The door is wide open now for you to do that if you're Kirby Smart. Now, it starts with you just keep stacking national titles on top.
Sure.
I mean, they're already kind of the team of the decade so far. They've won the most titles in this decade. They've been playoff contenders or top 5 teams since then. So you can get to the end of 2029 or 2930 and kind of look back and go, 2010s were Alabama, the 2020s was Kirby Smart's era, the Georgia football era. So I think that's kind of your next step if you're a head coach at Georgia. And I mean, that's really it. There isn't a whole lot of other boxes to check off specifically, and maybe produce a Heisman winner.
Yeah, I kind of asked it because, everybody says Kirby Smart just needs to get one more ring. Like, we want one more ring out of you before you retire and you leave Georgia behind and you go on and do other good things. But that's always what you're going to say. Like, if you won the national title this year, then it's going to be like, just get me one more, Kirby. Because, I mean, there comes a point in time where over time you want to win another ring, and there's that competitive edge with fans, and everybody wants to win a national title, to where I think that some fans would be satisfied, obviously, with 3 national titles, as you should be. But there's always that feeling of like, I just want one more from you, or I just want to win one more national. Because, like, it kind of feels this way of, we know we're in the glory days. Georgia fans know that they're in this beam of light, and you don't know what comes after this, to where you want to make sure you capitalize off of it as much as you can, and you have so far. But I think everybody kind of wants that one more national title. But in reality, like, that isn't like a box that has to be checked off. But you brought up how Nick Saban is the GOAT, like, or if Kirby Smart retired today. So let's say Kirby Smart retires today. Is he second best behind Saban all time?
All time, I don't think you can make. I don't think that's fair to say. I mean, you've got guys like Bear Bryant, and you've got guys that have done this for 20 years and had successes. So I mean, Kirby Smart's run. Kirby Smart at his peak is one of the top coaches in college football. This is a basketball analogy, like prime Derrick Rose. Prime Derrick Rose is never going to touch any top 50 on the NBA all time. Yeah. But you could say like that period of time where Derrick Rose was at the best of his game, he was arguably one of the best players in the sport. You could say the same thing for Kirby Smart. If Kirby Smart retired tomorrow, you could say, hey, that period from 2020 to 2023, Kirby Smart was as good as any coach ever. Nick Saban at its best probably couldn't compete with what Kirby Smart was doing. So I think that's where you're at right now. But just having the longevity of that era and saying, hey, from this time to this time was the Georgia football era led by Kirby Smart.
Yeah, and I think that's a better way to do it, because it's so hard to compare like a Bear Bryant era to even what Nick Saban did, but even more so of what Kirby Smart is doing right now in college football, because college football is so different than what it was when Bear Bryant was head coach. And, you know, each of them had to go through different changes, but college football has changed so much and drastically changed. Winning national titles have gotten even more difficult than they used to be. So I think it should just kind of be era by era of like, you were the greatest coach from the 2020s. Like for the next 7 years, if Kirby Smart continues to dominate, then it is. Kirby Smart was the greatest coach in the 2020s. Like he dominated for a decade during that time, and he was the greatest coach. And like, I think that is how it goes, because then you get into these whole like LeBron, Michael Jordan-esque discussions and all this stuff, and like, it's just pointless. You have goats of eras, and Kirby Smart can absolutely dominate the NIL 12-team playoff, blah, 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 modern college football era that we're in. And he can stamp that as his. Now, I mean, whether or not that leads to, is he the GOAT or Saban the GOAT debates, I think that's kind of irrelevant at this point. And I think it's also just an argument that's never going to end. Like, you can talk in circles around. I mean, we still to this day have LeBron Michael Jordan arguments. So you're never going to get fully satisfied. But there is a coach in Texas that's kind of making his own legacy, trying to make his own legacy right now. So much so that a major analyst believes that his team, Texas, looks like 2021 and 2022 Georgia. Who dis? Who the one saying this? Are we going to expose him? Put him on blast? Expose him. He said it. He put his name to it. Peter Burns believes that Texas is 2021 Georgia and Bama, or Georgia reincarnated. You know what this is? This is that early welcome to the SEC. I'm going to give you some propaganda to buy in type stuff from Peter Burns. Like, we got to show love to you from our network. We're going to make sure you get some of the SEC love. This is how that feels from Peter Burns of, I got to make sure we take care of these newbies into the conference. Yeah, and I mean, the quote is kind of, I get what he's saying. Like, here's the quote. To me, the top two teams to beat right now are going to be Georgia and Texas. I was just down in Austin. I handled their spring football game, and it looks every bit like the way Georgia looked in 2021, 22, and 23. I mean, they get off the bus. They're monstrous people. They're deep at every position now, and they have a quarterback, Quinn Ewers, is coming back. So in that aspect of, hey, this is a team full of talent, and they're really deep, and they have a really talented quarterback, and their roster's filled up, fine, compare them to 2020 Georgia. But Texas is built nothing like Georgia was in 2000. So he was just basing this off of man, they look big. They look like SEC players. Yeah, let me think of the best team that we can compare them to and say they look like that right now, this as a form of a compliment. This makes you think back to the comments that were made of, could Ohio State be the 2021 Georgia defense in 2024? Why? Georgia fans should take this as a compliment, honestly, because you have now been like, you're the measuring stick. You're the gold standard. Hey, are they the 2021 defense? They look like Georgia has the last 3 years. I get it. And I mean, when you break it down, obviously they're not. They're different offensive schemes. One, Stark runs a completely different offense. Their defense, especially their secondary, is nowhere near as strong as Georgia's was in 2021 or 2022. There's not a Jalen Carter. There's not a Jordan Davis on that defensive line right now. Like, they're not going to stop the run as easily as they were last year. Who's the guy that had in the D line? Tavondre Sweat last year? There's no Tavondre Sweat on this roster, from my understanding. Like, you're going to have much more trouble stopping the run. From what we saw in the spring game, your secondary is going to have a lot of problems. So to say that, they're 2021 Georgia, technically fine if you want to go out and say it's because they look like one of the best teams in the country and Georgia's the measuring stick for that. That's fine. But if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, that's an asinine comment to say. Well, it's dumb because Steve Sarkisian does not need his football team to be 2021 Georgia. Now, does he need them to look like it? Like physically? Sure. Everybody wants to look the way that Georgia did in 2000. Now, he did mention like we're kind of focusing in on 2021, but he did say 2021, 2022, and 23, as in they look the part of a national title contender. That's probably what Peter was getting at here. And that's understandable. Like people believe that Texas is a national title contender this year, and they do look the part. But it's attaching Georgia's label to it and slapping it on top of them of that isn't required because they aren't that. They don't need to be that. I think if anything, you could slightly compare them to what they were in 2022 because Georgia's offense took a major step forward that year and it felt more balanced, but I don't think it's going to be as balanced. And again, Steve Sarkisian does not need to be this defensive-led football team because he's an offensive-minded head coach. That's what he prides himself on. That's what made Texas great last year, is because Quinn Ewers and A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy and that offense were putting up points and they were outscoring people, not because they were the defensive-led football team. That's my only disagreement there. But again, I don't think Peter was necessarily saying that they are going to be this version of Georgia or anything like that. Right. But it's just what's going to happen. People are going to compare them to Georgia, and Georgia's going to be continued to. Again, we just talked about how they were the team. They've so far been the team of the 2020s, and so that's how teams are going to be compared to. This was the best team in the 2020s so far, and that's kind of what we're reminding me of because they're going to be one of the best teams this year in the 2020s.
Yeah, when you become the measuring stick of college football, everyone kind of wants to throw the hey. Are they this team now? Or is this team Georgia? Or is that team going to be Georgia's defense? And obviously, when you break it down, they're not going to be similar at all just because of what Georgia does is very different. Now, there are going to be teams that do it similarly. They're going to be similar rosters. But you just have to kind of understand now that these are the comparisons and these are the things that are going to start getting floated out.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than when people were comparing Georgia's 2021 defense to Alabama of 2008. Like those types of things of... This is what they remind me of, and it makes sense. But again, I don't think it was Peter saying, "Oh, Texas going to set records on the defensive side of the football this year. You get ready for that." But it is interesting how, I mean, it continues. And I know Peter picked Georgia and Texas to be the top two teams in the SEC, and I think Peter actually picked Georgia to win it all. He said he thinks that Georgia's going to get the job done this year because of what they have in Carson Beck and the rest of the unit. But it continues to be consensus of everybody does think it's Georgia and Texas this year.
Yeah. Georgia, Texas, two teams that got players on the deluxe edition of the NCAA cover. That's right. We're talking about the video game again. So if you don't care about video games, you're probably not going to... It's
brief, all right?
You're probably not going to enjoy this segment.
And this is about the Dogs, man.
But so go ahead and lead in with this.
This is about the Dogs, man. So David Pollock, Georgia great, put out a tweet today of when they unveiled the cover for the new video game, and he said he quote tweeted it, and he said, "Y'all are going to flip." A little cryptic, a little bit. People are kind of questioning of like, does this mean that David Pollock is going to be like part of the announcing crew somewhere? Are they going to plug him in there, or does it mean that David Pollock is already set up to have a card in the game and be a player that you can use on Ultimate Team, or maybe they have some legendary teams that you can use and things like that? So, of course, just like we asked it in the National Hour, but we're going to do it about the Dogs this time specifically. Who are some dogs that need to be in this football game other than David Pollock, of course?
So, I mean, before we get into that, it also could be like David Pollock just like got exclusive access to the game.
Sure.
It's like, y'all are going to love it.
You spend time on set with Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler and all of them. Yeah. You probably get some inside knowledge on what is going on.
Yeah, you have to imagine he's friends with them. So he might not be in the game. I mean, he is in the game for sure. He might not be a player in the game, so I just want to put that out there. But going back to what Georgia legends you want to see, it's obviously that from that 2014 to 20 whatever now season, you got to have Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. That's for sure.
DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, George Pickens, Stetson Bennett, like guys that would be so much fun to play with. Who did you have? Because I have a couple of obscure ones.
I think like how video games are played now, James Cook might be the most broken Georgia running back, and how video games are played now.
That's true.
He's just, I mean, everybody wants to throw the ball and chunk it. James Cook was as big of a threat as anybody in the open field from a receiver standpoint. I mean, he took the top off of defense multiple times at Georgia.
I like that one. I'm going to say Champ Bailey needs to be in this game. Champ Bailey would be so much fun to play with because, I mean, he's a do-it-all kind of guy. You could have him on special teams. You could have him at cornerback. Playing corner and safety is kind of hard in video games, but it's still a lot of fun if you have a guy like that who can make plays. But I have two more that I think just absolutely need to be in this game if any Georgia lore is important. Number one is Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart has to be a playable player in this game because one, it's not like he was a great safety at Georgia during his time, during some down years, but the fact that you have a college football coach that is coaching at their alma mater and you can have them represented in the video game, I think is incredible. And the last one I have is you got to figure out some kind of way to get Larry Munson featured in this game. Whoa. I don't know how you do it. I don't know. I don't want them to do like some AI voice thing, but to have some great Georgia calls or just have like
talk about chills. Oh my gosh.
If Larry Munson's featured in this game, dude, it'll be insane. Jeez. I don't think he will be, but that's my hope. That would be
really sick. That would be awesome.
Do you have any others on that?
I just had a thought of like, I think it would be fun if this year in the video game, like they're doing it right now in Madden, how like they take players out of position and they give them a card. Like Joe Alt, the offensive tackle right now, he has a defensive back card in Madden and it's like a 97 overall. So you have this massive human being that plays defensive back for you. I think you could do it, but more strategically for college football of like if a player played a certain position in high school or like they switch positions between their careers or like during their time in college, you could have them play like someone like Hines Ward, for example, who's just a Swiss Army knife and could play, like he played quarterback at one point. If you got a Hines Ward quarterback card, those things would be fun.
That would be a lot of fun. Like out of position players.
Yeah.
Who's an out of position player that you'd have for Georgia? Todd Gurley at quarterback.
He did have one of the longest passes for
that
Georgia
season
for a while too. He held that record for a little bit. I think for like a couple more seasons after that.
That was like 2014 Vandy.
Yeah. Out of position players. I'm trying to think. Oh, like a Mecole Hardman DB card.
Yeah, something like that. Or like a Jordan Davis running back.
Dude, that'd be nasty.
That'd be a lot of fun.
That would be a blast. Or like Darnell Washington as a safety. You're not winning a single 50-50 ball.
You're going to kill someone if you have Darnell Washington.
Exactly. That's the fun of it.
So the NFL schedule came out, and we've got a couple of rookie dogs playing each other. And now, this is a segment that's important to me because I'm a Raiders fan. I feel like that's
boo him. I'm just kidding. I don't care about the Raiders.
The Raiders are the most like it's so hard to hate the Raiders if you're a Falcons fan.
Because you just feel bad for them.
Well, that and it's like you're a Falcons fan. Like they have no history together. Like why would you hate?
And we kind of suck too.
Yeah, y'all do suck. But no, obviously the Raiders drafted Brock Bowers this year, and the divisional rival of ours, the Chargers, drafted Ladd McConkey. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to watch this. Obviously, they're not going to play off against each other, but it is going to be a lot of fun to watch those two kind of go at it as former teammates. And I'm going to have to learn to hate Ladd McConkey.
You're going to hate him?
I'm going to have to, dude. He plays for
the Exciting Whites reunite, huh?
The Exciting Whites. People, if you don't have a Twitter account, you don't know about that, but the Exciting Whites are going to have to reunite on the field.
Wow. So obviously there's going to be an exchange of the jerseys, you would have to imagine after that. So this is week 1?
It's week 1. First week of this, like rookie debuts, Ladd McConkey versus Brock Bowers.
All right, we got to go ahead and who do you think has a better day?
I'm going to go
take your bias out of it.
Ladd McConkey because there's less weapons around, and I don't think the tight end position is something that's going to be super featured in that offense. And I mean, it's Justin Herbert versus
Gardner Minshew. Well, I think too, like as great as Brock is, there probably is going to be somewhat of a learning curve for the Raiders to kind of figure out how exactly they want to use him and where he fits best in their offense because he can do everything. It might be a little overwhelming to be like, well, where the heck does he fit best? Like, where do we want to keep him at the most because he is so special? And so they'll kind of figure out, and once they get into a groove, he'll start putting up great numbers for the Raiders. And also too, like Michael Mayer being there, that kind of inhibits it a little bit. But again, those are two different players. They're not going to use Brock the same way as they do him. But I think I do agree with you because Ladd McConkey, there isn't going to be a learning curve with him because it's just go let him play, run routes, and he's gonna excel. That's what he's done the last 3 years at Georgia, and he has a better quarterback. He's probably in a better situation for his position to get more reps. And he just kind of feels like one of these players where you go out there week 1, he'll get the job done for you. Not that Brock isn't that, but situation based with the teams. And again, I think that the Raiders might have to take a little bit of time, not too much time, just to kind of get in their groove with using Brock.
Yeah, no, by the way, it's Quentin Johnston, and then like who else is going to take your receptions if you're Ladd McConkey? So I think Ladd McConkey could be in for a really, really big rookie season with the Chargers. A breakout season, if you will.
A breakout?
That was such a shitty transition.
So I saw this. This is what propped this segment for today's show. I saw this article from ESPN, and it was talking about the top 10 breakout candidates for this college football season. Who do you think it was? Who do you think it was for Georgia?
Can I get a hint? Was it
Defensive side of the football.
Defensive side of the football breakout? I don't think he's a breakout player because, I mean, the Georgia space knows about him, but I think C.J. Allen's going to be the guy that the national media kind of goes like, oh, whoa, who's this guy?
Well, it is in the linebacker room, but it's not C.J. Allen.
Who is it then?
Raylan Wilson.
Really?
Raylan Wilson.
Someone did their homework.
As the breakout, and he was like top of the list. I believe he was number 2 on the list, actually, if I remember correctly. So ESPN, very high on Raylan Wilson and what he could do this next year. I'll go ahead and just kind of read the quote, and then you and I will get into our own breakout players for this next season. Got to pull up the article. I thought I had that one pulled up, but I had the wrong one. Here we go. This is a quote from the ESPN article, and it kind of explains why they picked him. It would not be a true list of breakout players without a member of Georgia's defense. Wilson looks like a great linebacker for the Bulldogs. Despite dealing with a knee injury, Wilson was an SEC all-freshman team selection, and the transfer of linebacker Jamon Dumas Johnson to Kentucky should further open up an opportunity for Wilson to become yet another household name.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like, honestly, I'm impressed that someone brought in last year and expected, like, hey, he's going to be the guy on third down that pull your ears back and go get the quarterback. I don't think he necessarily was quite ready to take over as he was last year, but he's in for a major year this year if he can put it all together.
Yeah, I mean, and two, if you think of like if Raylan Wilson is a breakout player for Georgia this year, you already get back. You have C.J. Allen going into year 2, and he looked great last year. So if he builds off of that, he's going to have another phenomenal season. And then you get Smile Munden back, who could have gone to the NFL, and now he's coming back to play college football. If those 3 names right there, and then on top of the freshmen that you got this class, I mean, that would be a monster season for your linebacker core. Like, if Raylan Wilson can break out with those 2 names ahead of him, that would require a very special season.
Yeah, I mean, when you said we were going to do this segment, I had him on my list because, I mean, he is one of those guys where if things go well and he lives up to his potential, he's one of the best players in the nation. Kind of what Devin White was in that 2022 year, I think. Not Devin White. Who's the other one? Harold Perkins. I'm sorry, I don't know why I thought
I didn't know where you were going with that. That's what I was like.
Harold Perkins kind of jumped on the scene. He was like, oh my God, this linebacker can go everywhere. So that's kind of what Raylan Wilson can be, I think. Who are some others that you had, though?
All right, we're going to do a Give Me 3.
Oh, we are?
Well, we don't have to clap if you don't want to.
I feel like it'd be kind of uncomfortable if it was just you and me sitting next to each other, like give him 3. Like it's better when Brooks is over there sitting at the desk. Obviously, he's not here right now.
We can't give him 3.
We can't give him 3. Cannot give Brooks 3.
Can't give Brooks 3 if you're not here, man.
Sorry, but yeah, it's almost too intimate if it's just you and me sitting right here. No,
it's fine. I understand what you're saying. I agree. We can give him 3 and just acknowledge that, hey, I'm clapping for you.
We'll clap in spirit.
My heart. We're clapping in spirit for you, but I'll go ahead and give you my 3. First up on the list, there has to be a defensive lineman to break out. There's quite a few names that you could choose from, but I'm going to choose from the guy that almost left and then decided to stay, Kristen Miller. No, not Nazir Stackhouse, the one that almost left that could have gone to the NFL, or Warren Brinson, but no, Kristen Miller, who almost entered the transfer portal but decided to come back. I think that he had a great year last year, but I think that this could be the year where things just kind of get pieced all together for him, and he puts it all together. He was great in run defense last season, and that's where Georgia really needs a defensive lineman to step up, as in the run game, get back to that nitty-grittiness of the defensive line, that front 7, and just be unstoppable in the run game. And I think that's kind of where Kristen Miller fits into this mold. Again, he was great last year. I think that going into this next year of getting more reps and being a meaningful contributor along with every other piece that Georgia has on that front 7, that Kristen Miller could do some special things, and they need Kristen Miller to do some special things this year. He's staying at Georgia, and that's a good thing, but you need to make something out of it, and I think he will. I think Kristen Miller showed signs last year of being a special player up front, and I think he'll put all the pieces together this year. My second one, this one seems a little bit odd up front, but I'll explain it. I think Gunnar Stockton is going to be a breakout player for Georgia this year. I think Georgia fans have already gotten a glimpse, and they saw some great things from him in the spring game, but as we've come to know during Georgia's regular season, there is opportunity for the backup to play a big portion of the second half if you get up big on some opponents. Now, while it may not be as many opportunities as there were in the past because of your schedule this year, I think there will still be plenty of opportunity for Gunnar Stockton to go in, get a lot of reps, and still in time for him to air it out a little bit and work the offense. I think people, more so the national media, this is who I'm talking to for a breakout player, of people are going to start watching Georgia games and be like, this Gunnar Stockton kid is actually putting things together. He looks like the starter for next year when Carson Beck leaves, and it looks like Georgia is in good hands for when Carson Beck does go to the NFL draft. So I think with a full offseason of Gunnar getting to work as a number 2 quarterback, I think he's going to put some great things on tape when he does get his shot to come play in the football games. And then my last one, This is another guy that had a great season last year, but he's really going to be in the spotlight this year, and this is why I think he's going to be a breakout player. People already love him, so it feels a little dirty to go ahead and to say this as a breakout player, but Dylan Fairchild, I think that he's just going to be special this year because people already love him. People are already going to be watching him, and he is so good and he is so consistent that it's going to be so hard to ignore him, and he's just going to continue to climb up the NFL draft ranks. I think people already like a lot of prospects on Georgia's offensive line, but I think people are really going to fall in love with what Dylan Fairchild is, what he does, and again, just how good and strong and consistent he is up front. He's going to be one of the spotlights of this Georgia offensive lineman that is filled with studs, and he's going to have a great season, I think.
Yeah, so reacting to your giving through, I think Christian Miller, someone on that defensive line is going to pop this year. Like it's so poised to have a star of that defense, like 'cause it's kind of a wide open lane right now.
Yeah,
like the last few years, I mean, obviously you went from Jordan Davis to Jalen Carter, and you had Devontae Wyatt in there too. Last year was kind of by committee. I think this year is really the year where you see a guy like maybe like Warren Brinson or Nas, even like you said, Christian Miller, kind of put it all together. Who's the second guy you said? Gunnar Stockton.
Gunnar Stockton.
I think Gunnar Stockton could kind of impress some people. I don't know if he'll necessarily put himself onto the national scene of like, hey, 2025, this is Georgia's guy. Because no matter what you do, coming into 2025, there's going to be like Jaden Rashada, Gunnar Stockton. Like, yeah, Gunnar Stockton can turn a lot of heads right now with his performances, but I don't know if a breakout year is what I would call it. Kind of put people on his national radar. Like, kind of what Carson Beck did in 22 when Stetson Bennett would go out for games and Carson Beck would kind of do cleanup duties. Like, hey, Georgia's got in good hands next year. We'll see what happens with that. Hey, it might be Brock Vandagriff, it might be Carson Beck. You're going to be more set up for kind of a really, really big quarterback battle in 2025. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be, hey, Gunnar Stockton's won this job this year. And I think that's kind of what his breakout would be. And then the third one was, you said, Dylan Fairchild. Yeah, obviously the offensive line is always a position or a group that you can kind of see stars built in, and you've had them each year. So I think Dylan Fairchild is one of these guys that can also wow the right people. Offensive line's never going to get the love that you usually get.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for him, he's not a freak like an Amarius Mims. Like, he's not a freak of nature in that regard. So I think he's an absolutely very, very, very good player. He'll be very good for Georgia in the next few years, but I don't necessarily know if the star power is there from a casual standpoint. I think he'll be a star in our regard.
Yeah,
he'll have a breakout season in that regard. But I'm and maybe I'm wrong in thinking that this will be like from the national media standpoint.
Just get a couple highlights on Cole Kubelik's Twitter timeline
Cole
on Sundays.
Cole Kubik has to make you a star if you're an offensive line.
He's the one that posts the highlight reels of all the offensive line. He gives them their flowers. So if you get a couple of those, you're having a good season.
Chad also says Joseph Jonah. I think he could absolutely be a
Brooks would be loving you for that one.
I think he's 1 year away from really being like, oh my God, this guy he's a stud. But he's going to have a couple of plays this year where you're like, wait, that's a freshman?
As a young defensive lineman, this year it is going to be hard to be a breakout player because there's so many other names in that room that need a breakout year.
The amount of reps you're going to get is just going to be so scary.
I mean, and then you also added in Xavier McLeod from the transfer portal, who it already sounds like he's going to get a fair share of his reps as well. It's just like, love Joseph Jonah. I think he's going to be a great player for Georgia. As a young prospect, it's just going to be hard to have one of these breakout years because everybody in that room needs a breakout year.
Absolutely. So obviously one of mine, I did 5 on the list because I couldn't.
Oh, 5.
And I was also anticipating us having some of the same. So I won't
share all 5.
I won't mention, well, obviously Warren Brinson and Nas, like I said, that defensive line room is poised to have someone break out and be a star. And you've got 2 guys that are essentially NFL players right now, should be on an NFL roster right now, but they decided to come back.
Take them.
Yeah, exactly. You'll take them. So, I mean, they could have big years. Christian Miller is another guy who could also have a big year. I think Anthony Evans, we've kind of hinted at this throughout.
You love some Anthony Evans, man.
I do like Anthony Evans. I think that he's probably the most promising from an all-around standpoint of the promise that he showed in special teams, because they do matter, and kind of what he showed you towards the back end of that season as the speedster guy. I think Colby Young is another one of those wide receivers that could have a breakout year because everyone's looking at Dylan Bell, everyone's looking at Ra Thomas. I think we could be sitting, because let's be fair, Colby Young's not getting the national love that Dylan Bell and Ra Thomas are getting, and I understand that. But I think Colby Young could really make a name for himself.
In fact, people are so unfamiliar with Colby Young that when I was reading an ESPN article the other day, they spelled it with a K instead of a C. They spelled it Colby with a K. So
who spells it Colby with a K anyway?
So people are very unfamiliar with who Colby Young is, but I think that what makes Colby Young such a great candidate to be one of these breakout players is even if he isn't just stuffing the stat sheet every single game, He might have a highlight catch every single game. He might dunk on someone once every game in the end zone or whatever. He might moss somebody and those types of things. I mean, that's what resonates with people. If you can create a highlight reel that's just going to be splattered all over the timeline for the next 5 years, you're going to be one of these breakout players. I think that's what his potential is just to be one of these guys that makes insane catches that people. That's kind of like what George Pickens' career in the NFL has been. He puts up great numbers, but George Pickens makes the Twitter timeline every single Sunday and every single primetime game he plays in.
I think Colby Young could have a very, very similar season to 2017 Javon Wims.
Ooh.
If you remember, where he was kind of like the 50-50 throw it up guy. And I know Ra Thomas also has this ability to, like, the wide receiver room is so stacked that it's going to be hard for anyone to kind of make a star name for themselves. But I think Colby Young's one of these guys that could cut through the noise. And then my last one, I've been on this train for a while, ever since the season ended, but I think Dalen Everett is going to be that kind of safety of like, hey, Georgia's got their next star safety. I think they've always, and I've repeated this before, but they've always gone into unique situations where, hey, who is the one player, the cornerback that Georgia has this year? It's Kamari Lassiter, or you go from Keely Ringo to Kamari Lassiter, you went from Tyson Campbell to Keely Ringo, things such as that. You don't really have that this year. I think Dalen Everett very quickly makes his presence known. And he might even play some star this year.
I think a lot of people just want to see him succeed because I think again, it just comes with the territory of playing defensive back. Of if there is bad moments, that's what people are going to remember the most, more so than the good moments, because defensive back is just one of those positions where if you're playing good, you're not being shown, so people aren't going to remember those good plays unless you're impacting the ball when it's thrown at you or whatnot. And Dalen Everett had good moments, and it's his first year starting, and he played against Kamari Lassiter, and when you're playing against someone like Kamari Lassiter who's just so consistently good, it's hard to shine up to that level of what Kamari provided for you last year. I think going into another year of starting, and he builds some more comfort under him, and he is kind of the center point of the defensive back room between the cornerbacks, I think there is opportunity for him to have a great season and for him to be this, like, kind of have a clean slate this year and just have a great season overall. I think there is opportunity for that, and I think he will do that. I thought he played great on G-Day, and I think that if there's anything that we've kind of learned from defensive backs at Georgia is that over the years, they just kind of continue to get better. They don't ever get worse. If Dalen Everett only continues to get better, then last year was already pretty good. This year might be great. Yeah,
and I think that the problem that Georgia corners suffer from is when one corner is doing so well, i.e. Kamari Lassiter last year, you're going to get some of the attention automatically put to you from an offensive side. Sure. Like, people are going to attack Dalen Everett more just because they're not going to be inclined to go after Kamari Lassiter. When you get attacked more, you get more opportunities to have someone catch on you. I mean, like, that old miscatch they had was one of the best catches I've ever seen. Well, that one-handed snag, and they've obviously it's like, oh, of course it's Dalen Everett. Like, things such as that where I don't think you're going to have that issue this year because Dalen Everett's going to kind of cement himself as the guy.
Yeah, well, my basketball coach used to always say, like, great defense, better offense. Better offense is always going to beat great defense. Sometimes you can be in as good of a position as you possibly can be. The quarterback might just make a perfect throw. The wide receiver might just make a great play. Things like that happen. And usually when that does happen, it's going to be for a big play. And, you can just kind of get ostracized as a defensive back for those types of things.
I got to give a shout out to Ruse because he gave us a nickname that I haven't heard before, and I think it's absolutely outstanding.
Gave you a nickname?
Us. You and me.
Us.
Doc and the Detective.
That sounds like a killer sitcom in like the 1980s. Doc and the Detective.
Doc and the Detective. I mean, that's kind of just... Should that be what we call the show while Brooks is in here?
The Doc and the Detective.
He's not going to like that. I'm joking. Just kidding. This is NBR and TTD. This is Film Guy Network Live.
Grind the tape.
What's next that we got to go to?
Well, I mean, I guess ESPN's just been killing it lately with these articles because I'm going to reference another one, but it technically was all in the same article. It was like a conglomeration of all things that could happen in the 2024 season and a bunch of rankings. And ESPN ranked the top 10 best games for the upcoming year. And Georgia was in the top 10 3 different times. You want to go ahead and try and guess the 3 games? It's probably not that hard.
No, I mean, it's Ole Miss, Alabama, and Texas, right?
It is indeed. All right, no, actually it's not. I take that back. It is not those 3 games. Clemson came in at number 7. Georgia versus Clemson, the 7th best game this next year. Georgia versus Alabama was ranked number 1.
Valid.
And I believe Georgia and Texas was ranked 3rd. Yeah. So
what was number 2?
Let me pull it up for you and I can tell you.
Because, I mean, I would feel like you have more of an argument to make Texas the best game of the season just because Texas is more primed for a national title run than Alabama is at the moment. Like,
I think it's just like the
history of the programs. Yeah, I get it. But I mean, you have the potential to have two teams that very well could be in the national title playing each other in Austin, Texas for the first time in SEC history. Like, that's huge.
You want me to go ahead and rattle off the top 10 for you?
Why not?
Starting off a little weird. Kansas State at Colorado.
That's 10.
That's 10.
All right. Dion effect.
Texas at Texas A&M. This is a really interesting one because
that should be higher, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Those guys hate each other.
Yeah, they do. And it's weird because they never have gotten to play each other in a while, but now it's
since
rekindling.
2011.
Yeah, 2011. So I think that's a great matchup. I think that one's going to be a lot of fun. Clemson and Georgia at number 8. Florida State at Notre Dame, number 7. Number 6 is Ohio State at Penn State.
Valid.
Sure. Clemson at Florida State, number 5. Ohio State at Oregon, number 4.
That's an exciting one.
That is a great game. That should be a great game. Georgia at Texas at number 3. Michigan at Ohio State, number 2. And Georgia and Alabama beating out the game. A little interesting there. It feels like especially over the last 3 years, it feels like Michigan and Ohio State, that's like number 1 game everybody wants to watch.
That's interesting. I mean, obviously the argument is the game has lost its shine because Harbaugh's not there, but Georgia and Alabama has kind of somewhat lost its shine because it's no longer Saban versus Kirby.
I think that the reason why it is, number 1, is because everybody wants to know, like, was it really just Saban? Was that really the difference between Georgia and Alabama? Because if Georgia goes and beats Alabama this year, then it kind of confirms everybody's feelings of that's just how good of a coach Nick Saban was. Because there was a few years there, really the last couple of matchups, where everybody felt like Georgia had the better team. Georgia should win this game, and they were favored in a couple of them. But Nick Saban just outcoached because he's the GOAT. I mean, he's the greatest coach of all time.
Is Kirby in a catch-22 here?
Or if he wins and it's like, well, you're supposed to now?
Well, yeah. Well, like, if you lose, it's just going to be Kirby Smart can't beat Bama. It doesn't matter who the coach is. It doesn't matter what the team is. Kirby Smart can't do it. If Kirby Smart beats Bama, it just only makes Nick Saban look that much better because as soon as Nick Saban leaves, hey, Kirby Smart finally beat Alabama. I mean, are we at a point where Kirby Smart's at a catch-22 to where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't? Like, no matter what happens in this game, it's going to be used negatively against him. Honestly, I think people should just be okay with knowing that people are just going to say that Nick Saban was that good because he was that good. I mean, obviously from a Georgia fan standpoint, like, you don't care you beat Alabama, you're going to live in the present. Like, Alabama fans are obviously going to say, oh, well, he was, what was it, 1-4 against Saban, 1-5? Yeah. So you just have to understand it's going to be used against you, which sucks. But especially in 2 different times where Nick Saban beat Georgia and Kirby Smart, in 2021 in the SEC championship game, where like Alabama was kind of a mess throughout the entire regular season, but you got your team to play the perfect game when you absolutely needed them to the most. I mean, you were just a week off from almost losing to Auburn. Yeah. Oh my God, that was a terrible game. Like, those types of things were like, for him to win that game, and then this last year where Georgia was clearly the better overall team. People knew that Georgia was better than Alabama, or they felt that way. But yet again, Nick Saban got Alabama to play this perfect game against Georgia when they needed to most to make the college football playoff. Like, those 2 games alone just kind of show me and prove to me of how great of a coach Nick Saban was, how much of a difference it is to have someone like him, and that it truly was just, he's on a different level. Like, he is just that good to be able to get his team on 2 different occasions to play the perfect game when they hadn't done that a single time during the entire regular season. Yeah, I think that's just kind of what got me thinking about how, like, you're kind of in a shitty situation if you're Kirby Smart here. Mm-hmm. Because no matter what happens, Nick Saban comes out winning on this. I mean, right? Like, even if Alabama wins, it's no one's going to look at Nick Saban and be like, well, I guess it wasn't Nick Saban. It was just, Kirby Smart can't beat Alabama. So it is a catch-22 there. And it's going to be interesting to see that game. I'm excited to go to Tuscaloosa. It is cool to think about how Georgia's really going to be the headliner of college football, because we didn't even mention the Ole Miss game. That has potential to be a top 15 matchup. I'm kind of surprised. Well, no, I'm not surprised. That's a top 15 game in college football for sure. These other ones, you're looking at top 10. Like, people feel comfortable saying like top 15 matchup for Ole Miss, or Clemson, maybe not top 10. That one's just because of the rivalry, I guess, a little bit. I'm really surprised because, I mean, all signs indicate the fact that they made this a noon game. Vegas has it as a 2-touchdown favorite for Georgia. Like, all signs indicate no one really expects this to be a very good game at all. Maybe it's just because it's Dabo versus Kirby, like 2 of the top coaches in the sport. I guess, but again, like I said, like even ESPN's kind of hinting like we don't think this is going to be a very good matchup. Like this might be a third quarter put the backup team in.
Well, I mean, I can read the justification for it. It said, "Want to identify the moment Georgia became the behemoth of college football and Clemson started its slow decline for perennial playoff contender? It might well be the opener in 2021 when the Bulldogs outlasted the Tigers 10-3 thanks to a pick six off DJ Uyunglele. If Clemson wants to reverse the trends, winning the 2024 opener will be an excellent start, not to mention a healthy dose of redemption."
I mean, that game was 3 seasons ago at this point. Are we going to try to ride the hype from that?
I don't know. I think it is just like Georgia versus Clemson is two teams that really don't like one another. There's already somewhat of a rivalry between them. Dabo Swinney, you could argue, is the second best coach in college football. Kirby Smart considered the best coach in college football. Those two things. There's
definitely a story to be made. They're like leading up to it, and on paper, it's like, hey, top 20 match, like top 15 team matchup, right? What's Clemson ranked right now? It doesn't matter. They're in the top 25. Hey, it's a top 25 matchup. These are two historic programs that have some history of a rivalry. They really hate each other in the 80s. Dabo Sweeney, Kirby Smart, the two active coaches with national championships, multiple national championships. Like, this is a show. And oh, by the way, we're going to play it at noon, and the spread is 16.5 points. Like, it just, to me, like, I don't understand why people are now hyping this up to be a top 10 matchup when all the signs are indicating it's not going to be. And like experts think, like Brooks thinks, we don't think it's going to be super close. Because you look at the roster that Clemson's put together and you go back to Dabo Swinney in the transfer portal, and it's just like they don't have the horses to go with Georgia right now.
Definitely feels like one of those games where Clemson might be ranked inside the top 10 when they play, but nobody's going to consider that a top 10 win for Georgia because Clemson's probably going to would at that point fall out of the top 10 and maybe stay outside of the top 10 after that. You know, like, because if you get drubbed up by Georgia week 1, it's going to be hard to save face after that point of like, if you lose by 20 points, it's still going to be like overhanging over your head of, well, you still lost by 20 points. Right. What we think is the best team in the country or top 5 team in the country, whatever. Like we have a hard time saying you're a top 10 team now, knowing what happened in week 1.
If there was a game Georgia had to lose in the regular season, like I sat you down and said, Jonathan, Georgia has to lose one game this year, which one would you want it to be?
Yeesh. Probably the Texas game.
Okay, why?
Just because most people do consider those two to be the top 2 teams in the country right now, or like Ohio State probably put in there maybe in the middle of them or even ahead of them. However you want to do it, it doesn't matter. But 2 of the best teams in college football. If you lose to one of those teams, if you lose to Texas, like one of the best teams in college football, what many consider to be, that's okay. Like, no one's going to really hound you for that one. And, you know, I almost said Ole Miss, but nobody wants to deal with Lane Kiffin talking shit about your program and talking crap to Kirby about, like, we beat you, you can't beat us in the Grove, those types of things. Like, nobody wants to hear that. And you definitely can't lose to Alabama because Kirby Smart can't beat Alabama even without Nick Saban.
Alabama's definitely off that list. Like, Alabama's one of the must-wins this year. I'm leaning Ole Miss because I think that a late loss to Ole Miss in the Grove is more excusable than going to, I don't know.
I'd say I would still remain with Texas because you go on the road. It's 2 of the top 2 quarterbacks in the country for next year's NFL draft class. Like, probably going to be a close game. If you lose by 4 points, 3 points, or a touchdown to Texas, it's going to be like, well, that was what we pictured of happening in this game. It was close.
I'm just terrified that if Texas comes in the SEC year 1 and does what we say they will, where they beat Georgia, they go to the playoff, make the SEC championship, that fan base, we're going to find out how insufferable that fan base is.
Texas?
Yeah, I'm more inclined to believe that, yes, Lane Kiffin can be very annoying and is one of the elite trolls in college football right now, but I feel like he respects Kirby enough to where he wouldn't go full throttle on that. Now, obviously, you're going to have to deal with Ole Miss fans, and they're probably going to rush the field if they beat Georgia, and that's going to be a sight to see. But I feel like Ole Miss is more easier to swallow than Texas, especially the fact that the last time you played Texas, you lost to them in embarrassing fashion.
So it's a matter of who would be more annoying, Texas fans or Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, because I don't think a loss necessarily changes the outlook of your season either way. Like,
no,
they're both one loss, and it's a loss in the conference. It's not going to change your playoff outlook. Like, Georgia's going to make the playoff for the rest of eternity, it seems like. So I'm not as worried about that, like how it's going to affect the game. I just don't know which fan base I want to deal with.
Well, we'll find out. We'll get a good glimpse of what fan bases are like. Hopefully, we get to go experience both fan bases this season. Get to go get a feel for what the folks who cheer for the Longhorns look like on game days, and even for Ole Miss potentially, as Georgia has to go on the road for both of those matchups. There are also some more time slots and more times announced for kickoff this year for more Georgia games. Florida game was announced for 3:30. The Alabama game, 7:30 kickoff. May not be a home game, but it is a night game. And then there was another game that was announced for 7:30, the Kentucky game. So
That's
not any night home games announced yet for Georgia, but the Florida game being at 3:30, do you think that's an indicator of games that are typically played at 3:30 on CBS? We're going to try and hold true to that and keep playing them at 3:30?
I don't know, because I would feel, I mean, now granted, Kentucky's been a night game for 2 years in a row now, but I would argue that, what was the question? 3:30 slot?
3:30 slot.
I mean, I feel like Georgia, Florida at 3:30 has always been kind of the tradition.
It'd be weird to play that game at night, like 7:30, like waiting all day for Georgia, Florida.
I think the city of Jacksonville, Florida is like, please don't play that game at night. We cannot handle Georgia and Florida fans drinking the entire day, then having a football game at night and stumbling off into the city at midnight. That city's scary enough as is. Someone's dying if you play that game at 7:30.
There's some people, too, that like to drive home after that game and just go ahead and get it over with. I don't know if you're going to be doing that after 7:30 kickoff. So I kind of like, if they want to do this, like keep the tradition of games that are typically played at 3:30, we'll hold them at 3:30. I kind of like that tradition.
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, that's an indicator. I think that's more just like that game as an isolation. Because, I mean, has there been any other 3:30 kicks? Like, it's all been noons or 7:30s, right?
Graphic announced. I can try and go. I don't know. I'm not going to try and find it right now, but I can't remember.
So, yeah, are you going to miss the 3:30 kick at all for Georgia?
I thought 3:30 was perfect. And that's what I thought. 3:30 was the perfect kickoff time because you got to kind of ease into the day. You got to find a noon game that you wanted to watch, and you just got to kind of hang out a little bit, like with your friends or whoever you're watching with, and just get a little bit of a breather. Then you watch Georgia for the next 3 hours, or watch whatever 3:30 game you're watching for the next 3 hours, and then right when that's done, you get to go into the 7:30 kickoff game, like the prime time, the college game day game or whatever.
You can go out.
Yeah, those types of, like, you got to still enjoy your night after a win or whatever. Like, I thought 3:30 was perfect for all of those reasons.
I have to agree with that. I mean, I feel like because CBS, do they still own the 3:30 slot? Like, is Big Ten just going to become the?
I don't know.
That's interesting.
Or will they just keep going with Big Noon? You know.
Well, no, Big Noon is Fox.
I know, but that's what the Big Ten. That's what I'm saying though. Is like CBS was known for 3:30. Now ESPN is putting Georgia, Florida at 3:30. To CBS, I don't know. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. At least we're not playing at 11 this year.
Isn't Alabama
that
doing
Alabama-Wisconsin game is scheduled for 11
Is that 11 a.m. Central Time, though? Because Alabama's on Central Time.
I feel like they would announce Eastern Time schedules.
Jeez, that's brutal.
I don't know.
That's gross.
Do you have anything else? We might cut it a little early tonight.
Might have to cut it a little. No, that's kind of all I have.
Shout out Georgia baseball for winning today.
Oh, yeah. Georgia baseball beat the Gators in Game 1 of tonight's series. Colton Smith had 12 strikeouts.
Good Lord.
Been dealing on the mound for
Wes
him.
Johnson effect, baby.
The Wes Johnson effect. Yeah, indeed. So,
do we have any other shout-outs we need to give real quick? Shout out to y'all for still tuning in.
Yeah.
Even though Brooks hasn't been here the entire
That's
week.
what we need to do.
The numbers have been up pretty consistently, like pretty consistent with what Brooks would be here. So
we appreciate you guys for putting up with us. We know we can't grind the tape like Brooks does or give you guys maybe everything that you want, that you typically tune in from Brooks, because he is such a great person on this show and he does offer a lot. But we appreciate you guys for tuning in to us. It looks like you guys have still enjoyed the content that we provided. We've been working our butt off this week to make sure we got good show scripts, good topics to talk about. And so we appreciate you guys for tuning in, hanging with us. Maybe next week it remains this way, but I think we're going to get Brooks back in studio for next week, so you have that to look forward to on the coming days. But that is going to do it for us. Thank you for talking that dog with us. We will catch you guys next week.
Appreciate it, y'all.